Okay, good morning, everybody. I will open the Urban Form and Transport Development Committee for Tuesday, the 17th of March. Welcome to members of the public who are here, mostly to support one of the public forum presentations. We'll come to that in a moment. Welcome to our councillors and Te Pio Kawe, welcome. Our staff. We had scheduled 2 public forums this morning, but one is unavailable due to restrictions. They are a member of the Health Board and therefore have priorities they need to keep with today, as you can imagine. Please be aware that we are live streaming our meeting as we do, and we need to remember to speak clearly into our microphones. We also remember to turn off our cell phones. Please, colleagues, or put them on silent. Please, members of the public as well. First of all, we have apologies this morning from Mayor Temby, who is out of the city on business for the council, I believe, and I think tomorrow a funeral, is it? We will have our very first quarantined councillor coming in via Skype this morning, not because he has the virus, but because his sister-in-law arrived from Europe to stay with them and is in the self-imposed 14-day quarantine, so he has taken himself out as well, which is understandable. So that's Jaco Arbry, who is already connected, I think. Jaco, you with us? Say hello.
Hello.
Hello, good. Okay, welcome, Jaco. So if someone would move that apology for the Mayor, please. Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Salisbury, seconded. Councillor Kitty. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that's carried. So we come to public forum. We have Margaret Murray-Benge, well known to us all, and Margaret, if you would introduce the others that are going to speak. You have 10 minutes, as I've said. If you allow time for questions in that, some councillors may wish to ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll be as fast as we can. But can I tell you, we have people here. I have Lee Nielsen on my left. He's from Belk Road, and there are a number of people from Belk Road here. I then have Leslie Pritchard, and there are a number of from Omanawa Road, and there are a number of people from Omanawa Road. And we could have filled the chamber if we'd had another week. It would have been easy because people in the Kaimais are absolutely desperate. The congestion on that State Highway 29 Cambridge intersection is frightening. We've circulated for you, I hope you've got it, just the basic issues, but that's it. And the congestion coming from the Kaimais down through into town, remember it's the major truck route to go to the port, and it's heavily used, and people have got to be able to get safely on and off that highway as well. And when you come to that Cambridge Road intersection, it's so congested, turning right from Cambridge Road into 29, well, you take your life in your hands for that one. You can go left down to the roundabout, come back up, which a lot of people do. It's safer, but that increases the congestion. And the other thing is coming from Kaimais, as I've said, is really just so unhealthy. And we are asking that it's all very well to tell us that planning is all underway for the Tauriko area. We know that. We know the boundary changes are underway. We know residential development will happen, but nobody can tell you in an exact timeline. And in the meantime, common sense tells me and the rest of us that people have got to be able to survive on our roads in the meantime. And so we beg you to please work with the NZTA to give us a safe intersection that is disciplined with lighting system so that we can actually move through there smoothly. You can't live in a society where you cannot get around the corners. And there's no point telling us to get on the trains or on the buses because we haven't got them. And it's a rural community. It's a major, major highway that has been neglected for a very long time. Interim work will take place. You can't give me a timeline or anybody else and everything seems to have come to a stop. In the meantime, people have got to survive. So a common sense decision, please, we beg of you. Lee Nielsen.
Yeah, good morning. I'm a Belk Road resident. My main concern, other than what Margaret has outlaid, is the unnotified resource consent for the new Winston factory at the bottom of Belk Road. That's RC 27251, signed off by one of your development planner, which I have here. We've had a meeting with Stacey. He has little appreciation for existing traffic volumes going in and out of Belk Road. I questioned him and said, how many trucks go in and out in the kiwifruit season between April and June? How many avocado trucks go out between November and February, fully laden with kiwifruit and avocado bins? He looked in the air as if he had never heard of it. That's one of your employees, okay? On top of that, he then issues an unnotified consent to build the Winston factory, the bottom of Belk Road, 990 truck movements in a short space of time between the port and Belk Road, 120 staff, and we estimate, because they haven't factored it in, about 25 service vehicles like courier vans and things going to or from that factory every day. None of this stuff was factored in. So we said, how can you sign off an unnotified consent as to traffic without factoring in those things? And he said it ticked the box. It ticked the traffic box. I'm sorry, we just don't get it, how it can tick the box. Thank you. Oh, yeah, in my view, as I suppose, as Margaret prompted me, the road is already congested, especially the intersection, with normal, seasonal, particularly horticultural traffic. Pickers, hydroladders, the whole works. I'm just talking from an orchardist's point of view. And okay, that road currently is in the Western Bay District Council, so it's not in your jurisdiction right now, but it's going to be, because the Land Commission is in that process of rebounding from Western Bay to TCC. I just find it's not, I've got no objection with the factory per se, big factory covering 6 hectares odd. Got real concerns that the homework hasn't been done as to traffic that will add to the already congested Belk Road and State Highway, Cambridge Road, lakes, roundabouts and Pies Park general area. All that factory will add to that that congestion that exists today. Thank you.
I now introduce Leslie Pritchard. I can't speak to you on Gargan Road because I already have, but Leslie can.
Morning. Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think it would be a good idea if we could open Gargan Road just in the temporary sense, just because there is no plan, and they've been talking about roading in Tauriko West for the last 10 years and nothing's happened. But in the meantime, we're getting more and more congestion, and I strongly believe if they could open that up, there's a lot of traffic coming over the Kaimais that is heading to the crossing and to the business industrial estate. And if they were to come off there, it would ease the congestion on Cambridge Road, which would then ease the congestion on the next roundabout, and it would make a huge difference. Thanks.
Chairman, we do have serious problems, and we do beg you to take a look as to what can be achieved in the interim. And temporary lights at the corner of Cambridge Road and State Highway 29 would be a significant help to discipline and share the balance between the congested traffic, as you've heard. You don't want me to talk about Gargan Road, but you've got it on the back of the paper that you've been presented with, and you can read that and check out Gargan Road yourselves and see whether you can make it work or not. So, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Margaret. There's no need to beg. You can be assured that we are working as hard as we can with NZTA. It is a state highway, as you know, and we are working hard with them to try and get solutions there for that corridor. So if there are any questions, we'll pause for that. But in regards to Gargan Road, as I said to you earlier, and Leslie, thank you for coming in, but perhaps Margaret might have made you aware of the answers she got when she came in. that is a resource consent that does not allow us to open Gargan Road. We cannot change that. That's a regulatory process that stands, and no matter what we may want to do, perhaps most of us around here would think that's a good idea, but we can't do anything about that. And likewise, sir, with the consent notification for Winston wallboards, that's a regulatory process we do not interfere in, and we prefer not to try and bring up our staff's names here in these public forums, because they are just doing their duties under that. So any questions from
If I could just add a bit to that, Larry. You say you're working closely with NZTA, but I cannot get my head around how can the TCC issue a substantial factory unnotified resource consent before they've sorted out the roading for the traffic with NZTA, before you issue that consent. So in theory, the building, we understand, is going to be approximately 2.5 to 3 years before completion, because it's a substantial 6.4 hectare building, not just the site. Can we assume that your planners have assumed that the roading will be sorted to time in with the factory completion?
Well, you could have a meeting with our staff to discuss that. We
Larry, we've met already.
We shouldn't debate the resource consent issues here, but you can be sure that we are working as hard as we can, particularly on the new ring road from State Highway 29 through to State Highway 36. It's possible maybe some staff might just give an update on when we hope the completion of that will be. There'll be 2 phases of it, one to connect to Kennedy Road and then ultimately a direct road through. So within that 3-year period, we're working very hard. Christine or Andy, could you?
In the meantime, sir, we've all got to survive on those roads. That's our issue. And we're saying we need interim decisions. But I think you've got 2 councillors that want to ask questions.
Andy, just give a response on West. And thank you for your assistance, Margaret. Who are the councillors for a question? Tina and Andrew and John. Andrew, could you give a response, please?
Sure, yeah, through the chair. Firstly, I would make the point that no industrial traffic, including traffic from the GIB plant, can use Belk Road or have access to Belk Road under the current staging provisions for the Tariko Business Estate, until that road is either upgraded or a replacement road and intersection is built with connection to State Highway 29. So at the moment the access would be via sort of Kennedy Road and Tarikura Drive out onto State Highway 36. DCC is working on the delivery of an early works package with NZTA, which includes closing the existing Belk Road intersection and replacing it with a new roundabout, which will connect into both the southern part of Tauriko West and into the Tauriko Business Estate and provide access up into the Belk Road area. Our current timeframes suggest that it's possible that in 3 or 4 years' time that infrastructure will be completed, and that connects onto the ring road that the chair has mentioned, which TCC is building in conjunction with the industrial developers through the business estate, and that road is in construction at the moment. The early works package also includes signalisation of the Cambridge Road intersection with State Highway 29 in roughly the same time frame that I spoke about earlier.
Can I respond to that, please?
No, you can't, sir,
Okay.
sorry. We will go to the questions. Councillor Salisbury.
My question is just of staff, I guess. The resource consent, do we have options to challenge, and what are our plans to challenge opening Gargan Road?
No, we don't. The resource consent was done several years ago at the beginning of the whole industrial estate there, and the chance to challenge it at the Environment Court or anywhere was back then, not now. So I think it's just not. We went through it when Margaret raised it the first time. Councillor Hollis?
Just a clarification on that. Are you saying that once a resource consent is given, that it can no longer be challenged or varied or anything like that? I just need some understanding on that.
Margaret is Barbara is the expert on this, but yes, once a resource consent has been issued, then it's an Environment Court process. Just checking with Andy though, is the Gargan Road, it's a structure plan, city plan issue rather than a resource consent issue, isn't it?
Correct, the requirement to close Gargan Road was as part of the city plan. Because Gargan Road is itself not capable of safely dealing with the heavy vehicles, so you can't have trucks turning in and out of there onto the state highways. It's not safe infrastructure.
Okay, final question, Councillor Robson.
I think there's some risk here. My request is really to the organisation, but I note that there's some confusion. The Chair spoke about a resource consent. Now we hear there's a city plan dimension to this. What I'd request is if we can document the response from staff in answering these questions in a sort of written form, it would help the elected members understand, and it would also help the people here at the public forum understand, and it would enable elected members perhaps to engage with the people here after this meeting on the basis of some sort of shared information. That would be helpful, so I'd like to request that from staff, if we could document that situation. Not a big report. Thank you.
It was provided to Margaret when she came in, and we can resupply that, all the documentation around that, both the resource consent and the city plan issues. Margaret, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to work together since you are a councillor at Western Bay. This is right on our border. We need to work strongly together to engage in this conversation with NZTA to get these issues solved. They are of concern to us as they are of concern to you. So thank you for coming in and presenting them, and thank you for all the residents that came in to support you. We are working hard on it. Please believe that we are doing all we possibly can. We've actually put our own money into investigations and construction and so on of that ring road so that it can go ahead without having to wait for NZTA's approval. There's a lot going on.
Sir, it's just the timeline. And in the interim and the survival of every motorist who has to use those roads. And I'm a resource management commissioner also, but I tell you there is something seriously wrong with the system. We make decisions and then there is a lag where people have to survive until the work begins. And it's that we have come to you this morning on. So yes, we will work closely with your staff. They're nothing but extremely helpful on the whole, and the same with the NZTA. But it's really important that we lock in together and work on it. I could bring up other issues, I might add, sir, but it wouldn't be appropriate today. I may come back.
That's correct. But we will attempt with the response, the written response we give, that we'll put what best timelines we can put in so you are aware of what things are developing. And so I think that would be helpful. Thank you for coming in, everyone. Have a great day. So the public forum on the pedestrian refugees is refuges, not refugees, is though they might be seen that way, is postponed. Any late items that we have, there will be some additional information presented in our public excluded on the report on park and rides that will be brought by Christine later, so it's not actually a piece of paper on the table, but there'll be some information coming, and we will do that in the public excluded part of the meeting. Any confidential business to be transferred into the open? There is none. So I'll suggest a little change to the order of business. We might change the last two items, 8.3 and 8.4, around so that we deal with the shared e-scooter trial first, and then finish with the park and ride study and then go into confidential for the final part of that and then come into open at the end. So if that's okay, if someone would move that. Thank you, Councillor Salisbury, seconded Councillor Clout. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that's carried. Thank you. So that then brings us to the confirmation of minutes on page 5, which are the minutes of the Urban Form and Transport Committee on the 13th of February. Has anyone got any changes to those do you wish to point out? If not, someone could move them as accepted. Thank you, Councillor Kitty, seconded. I don't think you can. I'll take Councillor Clout just for now. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that's carried. And then we have conflicts, declaration of conflicts of interest. Are there any on any of the agenda items today? There are none. So we'll go to the first item of business, which is the submissions to the draft National Policy Statement on Indigenous Biodiversity. No, that's from the minutes. What am I doing? I need to change the page. I didn't think it was there. My apologies. We will be dealing with this large item of the quarterly report, Transport and Water Strategy and Planning Projects. Thank you, Robert and Andy, for taking us through this. Thank you.
Alistair.
Just as an introduction, we provide an update report on the waters and the transport, and they'll also provide an update on the urban form projects. We thought it was a bit too much all in one. I think when we've brought them to you in one meeting, it's been a bit much, so we've decided to split them. So this meeting we'll do the transport and waters, and the next meeting we'll do the urban form. So we'll alternate between them to give you more time in each meeting to actually drill down in some of the detail, rather than we've found it's been a bit rushed in the last few.
Right, we're in your hands about how we go through this, but we thought we'd just quickly go through what we thought were the key points to bring to your attention and then let you ask questions, if that is okay.
So is that all right, members? We'll come back. You've got your questions marked, so we'll come back to them.
Great, thanks.
Good morning all. So just starting with the Urban Form and Transport Initiative, you'll be aware that the interim report was released in December. Now we're working as a group to identify the preferred program, so that's involving a level of economic, financial and transport modelling, and the final report is due by May. There's still considerable work and evidence build to move from those 4 interim scenarios into a preferred strategic direction for form and transport. Let's step through into Transport System Plan. Yeah, Transport System Plan. So this is a next step project leading from UFD. It'll focus on essentially the form elements of the strategic network. So it's more a design level activity. We're right in the middle of the procurement process at the moment with a preferred supplier team identified, and we're negotiating with those. So we're to program at the moment and looking to appoint very soon and get that practical work underway. The first step will be developing the operating framework, which will help us understand how we then provide those modal priorities across those different corridors and routes that then help frame the design process for those areas of priority like the Hewletts and 15th. The regional mode shift plan, this is a new one to this table. So the Transport Agency has identified a need to develop a mode shift plan. So this is common again across all of the high growth areas, Tauranga being one of the 5 areas where a mode shift plan is being developed. It comes from a ministerial level direction. At this stage, we're in the scoping stage of developing that mode shift plan, and it's looking like it's a document that will bring together work we've already got underway. So things like the UFD work, the Te Papa work, the Transport System Plan work, Cameron Road work, so and the cycle plan work. The delivery timeframe is around mid-year, and it's also been signalled to us that this is one of those things that will help support investment decision-making by the agency in the next National Land Transport Program period. Infrastructure Development Code, so development continues. There's been the IT Information Technology Toolbox under development that'll help us more effectively apply the street design guide and help, when I say we, that's the developers apply that as well when they're looking at new subdivisional areas. And we're continuing to respond to the feedback from stakeholders on the design standard drawings for typical street types. We'll be looking to bring that back to the committee at either their next meeting or the June meeting with an update and direction from there. Parking strategy, similar update to the last update in November. This is looking for direction from UFD now. There's been quite a sort of body of research developed over the last 18 months, 2 years by Tauranga City. That work's been referred into the evidence base and assessment of UFD, and we're expecting direction from them on that as the final report comes to, is developed. And we're also still awaiting feedback from MFE on national policy statement and parking provisions in that. The next one, Pike and Rudd study, I've just leave that until a report later in the agenda.
We'll park that till later.
Transport model, so this is an ongoing improvement program. It's a long-term program and work with key partners, so the agency, Western Bay and the Regional Council and ourselves. It's quite a technical process of continuing to look at different modelling approaches and evidence to support the modelling, but it's pretty important to help then support good direction for things like UFD, the Transport System Plan, and then the more lower level detailed design projects.
Just on the eastern corridor, still quite a bit going on out there, despite the delays we're facing with opening up land in Te Tumu. So design work is still underway around the Papamoa East interchange, and the next stages of Te Okoroa Drive and a small section of Te Okoroa Drive is planned for construction next financial year to enable one of the last residential zone blocks in Wairaki to be developed. In terms of the PEI, we're still working through the HIF process around final cost sharing with NZTA and also exploring options, further funding options, potentially around tolling and other options with developers around delivery, potentially allowing that to be delivered early if possible. Noting here that the Papamoa East interchange is absolutely critical in opening up and the development of the town centre area in Wairaki, which is already zoned, and without the PEI, that development's likely to be to struggle for some period of time. In terms of Te Tumu, the structure planning around transport is largely complete, and we've been able to deliver through that structure planning quite a significant multimodal transport network with high quality of walking and cycling and public transport facilities along with roading networks. And I think that probably covers things on the Eastern Corridor.
The next one down the list, Haureni Causeway, Turret Road. So this is one that is to be informed through UFD direction on network function, and then the Transport System Plan will help us understand those modal priorities through that operating framework development. So as that operating framework becomes available, which is programmed for July, August this year, we'll be able to sort of then step into design processes to move that one forward. Baylink update. So this project, there's been a level of modelling and analysis to understand how it could or may be able to provide for public transport priority and pedestrian movements through the improvement project. The agency have recently advised that they're anticipating a decision on the underpass towards the end of March. That decision will then allow the design to be more or tested in more detail, so that end of March decision that the agency have signalled is quite key to next steps. State Highway 2 North, Tauranga, Waihi to Tauranga, including the Tauranga Northern Link. So you'll be aware back in late January, the government announced the New Zealand Upgrade Program. We're working now with the agency on their program and looking to get more definition of just the timing for steps and the implications and consequences of that investment program, and sort of working closely with Regional Council and Western Bay on that, as well as the implications are across the three other partners to transport.
Yeah, so on this one we've signalled to NZTA what some of the key issues are that we need to address from a local authority point of view. Things around like access to Smith's Farm, the design of some components of the connections into our network. There's significant water pipes that need to be realigned across the TNL. There's land that we need to sell to NZTA. There's quite a number of issues there. At the moment, their focus is on some whole of program issues across the NZ Upgrade program, because there's multiple transport projects, and they're looking over the next wee while to start diving into those local issues and setting up some more formal governance and integrated sort of arrangements where we can work more closely and start working our way through some of those issues in the next month or so.
Western Corridor, State Highway 29, Tauranga West. So I guess we've had the public presentation this morning on one of the matters related to that. The agency started the longer term, or restarted the longer term piece of work in December. We're still working with them on the program for next stage delivery of that and how it will integrate with the early works package, which is focused on how do we access or gain access to enable residential development and urbanisation of the Tauranga West area.
Just a couple of key points to note here in terms of NZTA see a very close relationship to the transport planning work and investment out in the Western Corridor to what TCC is planning to do down Cameron Road. So just put that in your mind for later discussions. And they're also very keen on a program of transport demand management, which could involve a variety of initiatives, but particularly around pushing residential densities as high as we can, as high as we can manage within Te Reko West. And we are, through our structure planning plan change work, we're working with Hamilton, and we're jointly going out to consultants to do some work around residential density and what can work both in the Hamilton and Tauranga Greenfield context at the moment, which we will bring to you in due course.
17th Ave connection to Takatimu Drive. So this one is impacted by the New Zealand Government Upgrade Program announcement, which was to confirm the connection from 15th Ave to Takatimu Drive. The agency have confirmed that their position remains of, in principle, support to a connection, emergency access connection at 17th Avenue, but they have flagged that that's likely to be a very short-term access if something is constructed. They're not clear at this stage as to whether there's available land and opportunity to provide safe access between 15th Ave on-ramp and an emergency access, so that will be a particular area of focus of the sort of option and investigation assessment that we'll bring back to you.
Sorry, if I could just jump in there and just quickly go back to the Western Corridor. I just have, and no, that's fine. I just have in front of me the city plan provisions around the stopping of Gargan Road. So it sits within the staging provisions for the Te Reko Business Estate development. And just quickly reading the relevant text, it says the physical connection between Tarakura Drive and State Highway 29 Gargan Road intersection is severed for all traffic by legally stopping Gargan Road. So to overcome that would be a significant sort of non-complying resource consent process. Be quite difficult, of course, given the background for why this provision is in the city plan, which is to do with traffic safety. And most probably the form of the Gargan Road intersection wouldn't be appropriate in its current state and would need some significant work if that was to be considered. So I wouldn't suspect it's something that could be done any more quickly than the early works package which we're advancing at this point anyway.
Hewletts Road area short-term investigation. So this was a piece of work that was done initially under the UFD umbrella to identify potential short-term operational optimisation type initiatives, and I understand it was reported through PSOC General Manager's report on 18th of February. The agency are now progressing and leading some investigations into some of those short-term optimisation opportunities that were identified, and that's around the sort of signalisation, phasing, some lane utilisation, and some relatively minor safety improvements at the top end, the far end of Hewletts Road from here. The Arataki corridor improvements. So this has moved. This is one that we've reported on previously. Now that that's in design and development, that's been one that's moved over to the General Manager Infrastructure PSOC report. But we're aware there's a wider community engagement issue that needs to be resolved, and work on that is underway. The bus facility at Arataki, so the program is to report the next stage of investigation to the committee in April at the meeting. So if I can park that for now. Bus facility in the city centre, so same report as November, that's on hold at this time until we get direction on city centre and the civic administration direction, building direction. Cameron Road corridor improvements, so this is a topic that we have a session with you at the end of this committee meeting, just to provide you with an update on progress and opportunity to discuss that then, if that's okay. Cycle plan implementation. So the route option assessment in two parts of the city is underway, and we'll be using that information to help inform the transport system plan as we start to layer on those different modes and help to understand how do we prioritise across those different modes and different routes across the city. That's a key piece of work to help support transport system plan development as well. Public transport implementation plan, so this is a sort of broad agreement between the partners, the Regional Council Western Bay, yourselves and the agency, and it helps to show how we're rolling out the implementation of those key things to support the public transport network around the PT priority, so things like Cameron Road project, which we'll talk to you about later, and then at sort of more operational level bus shelters and bus facilities. And final one on the list is just a quick update on the Transport Agency funding situation. So we're continuing to work with them on those necessary points of entry, like the Transport System Plan, to confirm the NLTF level of investment. We haven't had any update since their last around how they're tracking relative to spend in the various activity classes, but their last update did signal that there's a little bit of headroom in some of those local road activity classes. And I guess the mind of the agency and also the regional council starting to turn, like ours is, to next long-term plan development. So starting those conversations around regional land transport plan developments and RLTP development, NLTP development, sorry.
Thank you, Alistair and Andy. So let's go back to page 15, please, members, and we'll go through page by page, take questions on each page. So page 15. Councillor Robson.
It doesn't relate specifically to an item, but the overview we've just heard. Tomorrow, 3 of my colleagues are going to be at a Smart Growth meeting. They're going to be asked to make a commitment to a memorandum of understanding where we agree to fund the projects that are coming out of the Urban Form and Transport Initiative. My understanding is the Urban Form and Transport Initiative gives the sort of function, the TSP is going to provide the form. How close are we to getting a feel for the size of the bill my colleagues are going to sign us up for tomorrow? And if we're close, do we have any indication of the scale of that bill, please?
Okay, well, for a start, I think we'll park that question because we are going through this report and we're going through the issues here, and we'll come back to it because we'll just give staff time to respond. You asked so many things in there, we just need a little time to prepare that. We're just going through page by page on the updates that are here, Councillor Robson. Good question, but let's carry on with this. Councillor Hughes.
Hi, do we have a preferred concept of the four that TCC would like to see in the FD of the four options they've proposed, or are we just sort of waiting for more information?
So we are part of the team that are working on it. At the moment, there's a series of workshops this week, and some of those are starting to look at first cut thinking about how do you move from 4 to 1. It's generally recognised that it's unlikely to be one of the 4. It's probably going to be a mix of components within the 4, and they have to go through a full assessment process, and that assessment process needs to meet the NZTA requirements. So the conversation this week is about the methodology that's going to be applied to get from 4 to 1, and we'll be sitting around the table participating in that process. There's still a lot of evidence work to be done, so the traffic modelling, the allocation of land use, the allocation of business and residential land, the transport modelling, and some of the other pieces of work, including, and this is picking up on Councillor Robson's question, the business case and cost estimation work has not yet been completed. So we're not in a position yet to form a view as to what would be the best preferred option coming at the end.
Thanks.
Okay, other questions on page 15, down to the transport system plan? Bearing in mind we are having a session later at the conclusion of this meeting where we can ask more about the smart growth meeting tomorrow and get further questions there, which staff will be a part of, Christine will be part of. Councillor Robson?
The Chair is obviously aware that the questions asked here, of course, are in public and screened for the public to see, whereas the session this afternoon, as far as I know, is not being live streamed to our community. Engagement's important to me. With regard to AFTI, where are we in terms of timing on AFTI? The original proposal around AFTI was a sort of 15-month time frame, evidence-based, reports delivered circa now. I hear that there's still a lot of evidence work to be done, quote unquote. Whereabouts are we in terms of AFTI's timing compared to the original timing, and where we actually are likely to finish up?
So in terms of the timing, it's pretty much on track. So the intention is still to get the final report to the Smart Growth Committee in May, and the program has it getting there. But as I have said, there's still some evidential work to be completed, and that's underway. So, but the team is working on that. I don't know if you guys want to add any more.
Just to add to that, we've just, Marty and I have been engaging with officials at, what do I want to say here, MHUT. And we understand that the timeframes which are driving AFTI, which are around getting a draft spatial plans for regions like the Bay, the Western Bay of Plenty, Hamilton, etc., up to Cabinet and past Government, is still in place around June and July this year. So there are some drivers around those timeframes.
If I may, Chair, on the basis of that response,
You may.
the draft spatial plan, at the time that gets sent to Cabinet, or preferably before, will that be made public? Will the public see what we're submitting to Cabinet in terms of the future of the city?
The current thinking is that AFTI, the existing draft FDS and the existing old Smart Growth strategy will all effectively be merged, updated and streamlined into the draft spatial plan. there's no intention to keep that in any, that can be a public document. Certainly,
Thank
there's been no discussion
I'm
otherwise.
heartened to hear that. Thank you.
And then the intention is that it would move later in the calendar year, so probably towards December, to become a final document, and that will enable it to pick up the work that's coming out of the TSP project and incorporate that into any final that's delivered towards the end of the calendar year.
Okay, moving over to page 16, including the TSP issues. Councillor Clout.
Yeah, thanks very much. The whole regional mode shift plan, it is like news to us, and I appreciate that you brought it to us now. Does NZTA have like a standard template they're working to around the country? Because obviously it relates to all the other growth cities as well. And if so, does that make it a bit easier for us to go through this process, or is it very specific to us?
So they don't have a set template. They're quite happy for us to tailor it to suit our needs, but what we are doing is looking to Auckland, who have already delivered their mode shift plan, and using that as a guide because it does help us to shortcut the process. I guess the other bit that helps us to shortcut this process is the work we've already got underway and sort of on the table, which is the UFD and the TSP and some of the other projects we're delivering.
Councillor Hughes.
Just trying to understand what that looks like. Is this helpful to what we're doing now, or is it another layer of tick boxing, or how does it actually fit in with what we're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's helpful and another layer, but it will reflect largely what we're already doing, which is UFD sets a direction around mode shift with other objectives. So there'll be elements of that, plus the transport system plan, plus the projects we're delivering, which all have elements of mode shift in them that we'll be able to sort of report back into a mode shift plan document.
All right, on to page 17. IDC code, parking strategy. Councillor Clout.
Thanks very much. On the parking strategy, is this designed to sort of enable and work in with mode shift, or is it actually designed to enforce mode shift?
It needs to be the first. There'll be, let's work with mode shift, and then there might be push and pull levers within that which might be wrapped up around how do we help to deliver mode shift. So there's direction around the incentives and disincentives to parking and what that can then help deliver from a mode shift perspective.
All right, we'll be coming to park and ride study later on. So Tauranga transport model, page 18. Question on the errors that have been uncovered in the model and the census recalibration. Do we have any understanding as to how the errors occurred?
Yeah, we do. So this is an MOT-led project, and as I understand it, the information that was collected through the survey then gets layered down into travel patterns. Some of that allocation or input data just looks like it's an anomaly, doesn't look correct, which we've picked up in our local sort of application of the data. One of the examples was there's a walking and cycling trip that looks like it's 50 to 60 kilometres long. So that's the sort of stuff through the local application of the data that we're able to then go back to the MOT and their suppliers to say, look, here's some issues, can you remedy and fix?
Page 19, Eastern Corridor, transport planning.
Yeah, thanks very much. I just want to make sure that the corridor, as it were, for transportation in the Te Tumu structure plan, how does that relate to the corridor that's existing in Wairaki and Papamoa Beach and Te Akaroa Drive? You know, in other words, is there going to be a bottleneck somewhere?
Short answer is no, but we need to invest significant money to ensure that doesn't happen. Effectively, the corridors of the boulevard in Te Akaroa Drive will extend into Te Tumu along with probably Papamoa Beach Road, but they will have a much lower priority in the transport network. The most congested part of the network is around where that sort of comes together in the town centre area, particularly around Te Okoroa Drive and the access to the Papamoa East interchange. And so all those matters are being considered through the design work that is underway at the moment, along with what we have done is a future-proofing exercise where we've said, well, what happens if instead of getting 15,000 people into Te Tumu like we expect, what happens if we get 25,000 people in there, run that through the transport model? That's showing that the infrastructure we are designing won't be able to cope, and we need to provide for some future-proofing elements, particularly in terms of some design elements of the PEI to enable a direct connection into Te Tumu, but also leaving on the table other options for the future, such as connecting Bell Road into Te Tumu. So our thinking has, I guess, gone beyond the standard kind of structure plan population we're thinking about. But obviously we don't want to build those things initially. You don't want to oversupply road capacity. We can't afford it, and it's not the direction around transport planning. So there will be a staged delivery program with certainly a high focus on mode shift to try and delay or not need those future staging elements of the program.
Andy, I'll ask one on that Eastern Corridor. You mentioned we're doing a further extension to Te Okoroa Drive, I think, and like I went out there recently and was staggered at how much growth is happening out there. And are we seeing a faster uptake as we're extending Te Okoroa Drive, that land is really just being gobbled up and turned into housing faster than we anticipated when we did our sort of assumptions around the land supply that was left?
I think, obviously we came really quickly out of the GFC, which is now some time ago, and things went really fast in the city and have continued to do so. You've had out in Wairakei, particularly, there's two large landowners out there. The Blue Haven developers who are at the eastern end have been really keen to get land to market and things happening a lot quicker than the other developer. So when you take it down to that micro scale, yes, in that particular area, things have gone a lot faster to the point where they've nearly exhausted all of the residential zoned land out there. And I guess, it's that, the fact that, say, the Lakes is now complete, I think just contributes to that issue, that there's not particularly many other options around the city.
But the issues around land banking still apply to potentially the other landowner?
I think to a lesser
or a slowness to get it to market?
They're certainly moving more quickly now. If you go out there, you'll see there's large swathes of their land which have been earthworked, and some stages that have been forward pre-sold, including additional connections between the boulevard and Te Okoroa Drive. So I think they're working in a positive manner.
Thank you. Page 20. Question. It's Bill, Councillor Granger.
Thank you. Look, as in regards to the preliminary design for the Turret Road corridor, will that be in our hands approximately July this year?
What we'll have in July, or programmed to have in July, August, is the operating framework, which is more a citywide document that'll help us understand how we deliver form solutions in different corridors. So why do certain corridors have certain design elements to them, and how do they add up to make sense in a coordinated way across the network? So the piece of work following that, which is the development of the preliminary design or single stage business case, that would be following the July-August operating framework.
So can you give us an approximate time?
Typically a single stage business case can take around 12 months because there are levels of engagement that we'll need to do across the community, as well as develop that design in partnership with others, including the agency from certainly a co-investment perspective, and also the regional council, because I suspect there will be ongoing other service arrangements around there to support their PT network.
It's just this,
All the previous work that was done, that was reported to you, so we did a lot of work around the RMA requirements and physically what you could do. NZTA, when they were transit, did a whole lot of work around that option analysis. So all of that work is there, and that will all be provided to whichever consultant is allocated that corridor as part of the TSP work. So we're not looking to reinvent the wheel. We want to build on everything we've already got, and then take what AFDI, the TSP operating framework, says the role and purpose and function of that corridor will be, and then move forward from there. So we sort of want to build on what we've got and get an update from there.
the point I wanted to make here, and you know it's quite sensitive to the community out there in regards to that corridor. The question I do want to ask you though, was there any consideration at all in regards to the possibility of 3-laning at peak periods as a temporary process? And why I ask that, and it's just that we're talking about time, it could be 12 months or more, etc., etc. And for me, personally, that's just far, far too long. The question I do want to ask again is the possibility of 3-laning at peak periods. Is it on the cards, possibility or not?
I just mentioned that with all the work that's already been done will be provided. So we did do some initial work on effectively having a 3-way, so tidal flow type option. We will now have updated employment and household projections, and we'd know the length of time, the capacity that we need over different periods of time, which will then help you to identify, is it a sensible investment to do a tidal flow for how many years, or are you better to go for the full solution sooner rather than later? So that will all be part of the mix, and we'll ask them to look at staged and ultimate options and what's the best option to go with that. And we're going to need to go through that process because we'll want to secure NZTA funding. The only way we'll be able to do that is to demonstrate that the options have been adequately assessed to be able to secure the subsidy.
Thanks, Christina. So there is a slight possibility. It may evolve or not. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's sitting in the mix.
Yep.
And that's what I'm saying. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We've got a lot of work that's been done. We don't want to repeat that. We want them to build on that and take that to the next stage. And the reason we did that work is so we would have it ready. So once these consultants were on board and we're moving, that we were already ahead of the 8 ball, if you like, and can move forward with some speed, which is more than we have in other corridors like Hewlett's, where we haven't got that level of analysis already done. That won't be there for that corridor.
Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
When the developers are doing these new developments through areas, do we work with them towards a cohesive network of cycleways through their projects and through communities?
Yeah, so the rollout of development in areas like Wairakei is guided by the structure plan, and the structure plan will show those key elements of where the key cycling networks are, and into the detail of like what the road and cross sections will look like for key roads to ensure that those can be accommodated. Obviously, we're moving from implementing structure plans that were developed in the early 2000s, and where some of that wasn't considered with as much priority as it is now. And I think once you see us starting to roll out our new structure plans in areas like Taurika, West and Te Tumu in the future, we'll see a step change in the delivery of that type of infrastructure.
Pio Kawe.
Morena. It's really just a request, just following on the discussion around the Haurani Bridge. Tangata Whenua would be interested, or even if I'm sure there is a report somewhere that looks at all of the bridges that cross the hub. So in particular the Haidini Bridge, Maunga Tapu, obviously the Matapihi Rail Bridge, in terms of how those bridges are being included into the connection in terms of our transport modelling. So is there a report somewhere that covers all of the bridges and around where they fit into the priority for our transport network?
So there's no one report that pulls together all the bridges. So like the Matapihi Bridge is owned by QRail, not either NZTA or TCC. Those bridges will be part of the TSP project, and we've had conversations. We've only had 2 governance meetings to date, and looking for tangata whenua representation. So there are conversations going on around how appropriate tangata whenua representation is on the governance group for TSP, and that will provide an avenue, but also once the individual corridor projects are set up, then we'd be looking to see what the appropriate engagement with Tangata Whenua is in particular corridors. So obviously the Haerini one, clearly there's going to be hapu that are particularly interested in that corridor, and similarly in each of the other areas. So it's important that we have Tangata Whenua involvement in the overall project and then also individual corridor projects. But as to one report that's got all of the bridges in, that doesn't exist.
But there are individual reports on each of those bridges?
So we don't have one on Matapiki. We know Kiwi Rail have been doing some work on it, and they sit at the governance group of TSP, so that'd be the right place to have the conversation. We've done some desktop work in terms of the Turret Bridge, and we can share that information. And Harbour Bridge, that's an NZTA bridge, so they'd be the ones that would have the access to that information. Mangatapu is NZTA as well, so that's why the governance group of TSP is the right place to have the conversation, because there we've got NZTA, Kiwi Rail and TCC all around the table, so we've got all the partners there, and as I said, we're having discussions as to how we get who the right representation is from Tangata Whenua, and those are underway.
Alistair, you mentioned in the Bay Link update the modelling and assess the findings to confirm the opportunity to introduce PT to that project separate from the underpass issue. Can you elaborate any more on what they're discovering? Is there anything coming out?
Sorry, at this stage I understand that the decision making, and I'm not aware of whether that's a positive or negative decision, is programmed to be made towards the end of March. That decision then influences how PT may be able to be provided through the improvement project. So I guess once they understand whether the underpass is in or out, then the next step is to see what the implication is for stuff happening at grade.
So is it either at ground level or widening the construction of the overpasses? How broad is it going?
Yeah, no, I'd need to go and ask others, I'm afraid, in terms of the detailed design on the table at the moment.
Anything to add, Nick, to that material?
No, I don't. No, I'm not aware of any alterations to the current design, but we would have to go back and check with them.
Flows on from the capacity kind of restraints that were identified potentially, wasn't it, from? Okay. Next, page 21, Western Corridor. I'll ask the question here, I think. What are the two major roading projects that are most important to us to facilitate opening up land supply and so on through the city? The two crucial things that would assist us in opening up more land for housing.
Land for housing, so that's state highway investments, or a transport investment package for the Western Corridor in Tauriko West, and the Papamoa East interchange, including the associated infrastructure, and particularly the road connection through Kaituna to Tumu 14 block.
Any other questions on page 21? Tauriko West, we heard the presentations in the open forum this morning on those challenges. I know it was reported to me the traffic backed up to Old Kaimai Road at one point this summer. It was when the One Love Festival was on, but still, that's what's happening out there quite regularly, at least to Omanawa and sometimes up to McLaren's Falls Road. Page 22. I'll ask a question. I was handing out the awards at the St John's Ambulance on Sunday, not shaking hands with anyone, of course. And I gave them a bit of an update on this project. They are very keen on it. I'm very pleased to hear we are still working on it. So we want to be clear that we're not pausing from as far as our volition is concerned. We do want to try and promote that. You said it could be a short-term solution, so we'll take whatever they give us, I think. Can you elaborate on how long a short-term could be?
So the agency advice is that the 15th Ave connection would be provided within 5 years. So short term would be up to 5 years.
And it wouldn't take that long a time to construct and facilitate some kind of connection, perhaps?
I think we need to wait for the investigation to advise on that. There are some stormwater geotechnical issues and just general connection safety issues which would need to be better understood. They're not insignificant.
There is a large bund there now that's been constructed. But when will we get that report back, do you think?
Be looking for the next committee.
The questions on page 22. Yes, Heidi? Councillor
Hewlett's
Hughes?
Road, short-term investigation, there's nothing here about cycling, and is that part of the short-term solutions?
So at the top end of Hewlett's Road, so the coastal end of Hewlett's Road, some of the safety improvements are associated with looking how to better connect pedestrians and cyclists across the roads at that end, the local roads at that end. But in terms of a cycle connection down Hewlett's Road, that's a matter that will be considered through the Transport System Plan project, because there's wider modal and network issues to resolve. It's a bit more complex than a short-term sort of optimisation piece of work.
So we're thinking about short-term safety measures more than, obviously it's not the best corridor for long-term solutions, but there's been a lot of push from cyclists for short-term safety, for signage, and for ramping up onto areas where they can't currently access off the road. Has there been any work done with the cycling community to see what would actually make things safer in the short term for them?
Yeah, just looking, over your shoulder to Andy Fiong, who is nodding that yes, there is. Andy may be able to, if that's okay with the chair.
Yeah, by all means.
Apologies, everyone. I don't think it made it into the report, but we are working with Bike Taronga and other cycling groups on short-term safety interventions on Twitter Street, and what that includes is looking at potentially constructing a shared path on one of the sides and improving the intersections. We're currently in the investigation stage, and we're getting some basic designs in place now to understand what the budget would look like and how quickly we could implement these solutions. Looking to really improve two key things. One is at the intersections of Hull and Totara and kind of getting through that area, and then how you would actually access Totara either across Hewlett's or onto the shared path going towards the harbour.
Can I just ask about Hewlett's, Sandy? Hewlett's Road, we've found it really difficult for NZTA to come to the party on putting more signage and to really look carefully at what's happening with safety around cycling on that road. Have we had any inroads in with them as to what they can do in the short to medium term on that street?
Yeah, we're still working with them we're focusing more on the Totara Hewlett's intersection, but I know all the Hewlett's Road corridor is kind of in play, and we are working with them. We're talking with them to try to put some more signage up or do some things that our local community has been asking for. Ultimately, they're working through their process to get those in place.
I do have an update on that though, since some recent developments with the transport agencies. So we've taken the initiative about the signage to them, and they have understood that and taken it aboard, and they are implementing those, and that's on Hewlett. So signage to improve clarity around the bus versus cycling lanes.
Great, thanks.
Just supplementary while you were there, Andy, on that Totara, what you started to explain started to sound to me like the plans that were already drawn. So will it be different?
What we're trying to do is, where we can, reuse the previous designs that we had. That the difference being, for the Totara Street designs, we had moved some curbs, and we were going to realign the street a little bit. And what we've done is, as a short-term intervention, we don't think that's the best approach. So where we can utilize the same shared path data or shared path design, we're doing that. But we're not looking to move curbs and to do major improvements. We're really trying to keep it into a very quick-term, low-cost solution, knowing that the TSP will look at the larger vision of Totara Street and how a probably more long-term design would look. So we're just trying to be cognizant of reusing designs when possible, but recognizing that we don't want to do long-term infrastructure changes.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that. We'll move on to page 23. Any questions there? Bus facilities, we're going to get a report back in April there, which will be good on the Arataki one. That's on track still. Session today on the Cameron Road, which we're looking forward to at 4. Page 24, cycle plan. Page 25. Sorry, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, on cycle plan, I thought I'd give Councillor Hughes a break. She seems to be doing most of the lifting in this space. I understand there's been some progress made with regard to the sort of idea of 3 primary arterials. I understand this has been consulted with some stakeholders. When are we likely to see an update ourselves in this? And of course, when are we going to share those ideas more broadly? How are we working our way through this at the moment?
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, so we're working through that the case, and from the top of my head, I think we're coming back to council in June with options.
To say something to that, Andy?
Councillor, just a quick question for you. You mentioned 3 arterials. Can you elaborate?
No one else is out of that.
Or to unpack a little bit on the 3 arterials?
Just heard on the, Coombe Ravine, there's information floating around out there. People approach you with things. So someone suggested to me that there's been some discussion. The response was positive to what it is they understood was happening. But unfortunately, I couldn't give a sort of considered or informed response. So I just don't like asymmetrical conversations with people. I prefer to have at least as much information as they have.
Yeah, so as Nick mentioned, when appropriate, we're ready to kind of report back to council on updates on the cycle plan and where we stand. And so when the time is right, we would like to come in back and kind of show where we are, what the progress is over the next, what the plan is over the next year, and where our current status is.
Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Is there also plans to have that discussion with the community? I think there's a lot of this kind of went to a dead stop, and it's been quite a long time. And I know things are moving on, but maybe they don't.
Yeah, we have a project plan in place that really looked at the next year, and given what's going on, there was a expectation of having some community liaison groups and community interactions over the next couple weeks and months. Obviously, with what's going on, we're not really sure what that timeline looks like right now with group meetings and things like that. But as part of our plan, yes, the community will be brought in, especially on the 10-year focus areas that we'll call them initially, and then telling the wider story of the cycle plan and how the larger funding case looks moving forward. We will work with everyone to understand what that schedule looks like moving forward.
Thanks.
All right, page 25, which will end our discussion on the transport. Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it sort of bridges 24 and 25. The PT blueprint situation, again, the public, I think, are extraordinarily disappointed with the results of what happened following the implementation of the blueprint theory, 14 months ago or whatever now. Where are we with that process? I understand it sits with regional council, but council is in the position, obviously, of having meetings with the regional council around PT issues. They don't really flow back into the public domain. They don't get a lot of coverage. Where are we with that review of the public transport system? I'm still getting reports of the sort of empty yellow buses. We've had this for a long time now, so.
In terms of the actual networking approach to PT that's going to come, likely to come through AFTI as one of the actions out of AFTI to review that approach and how that fits in with the land use and transport package. And it's also going to sit within the TSP. There'll be a work, well, is going to come up as part of the system operating plan, the role that PT does, and then within each of the corridors we'll be looking at how it's best to move people from origin and destination through the particular corridor. So there's a few things coming up in the next year that's going to address it. If you're talking around roles and responsibilities between the two councils, that's not currently sitting in that work program. That would be a separate political conversation.
Clarify, less the roles and responsibilities issues. I have a view on that, obviously, but know more about, and I suppose this is a bit like Councillor Margaret Murray-Benge, what are we doing in the meantime? There's a lot of these buses wandering around town, and I thought there were some actions being taken by regional council, and certainly, as I didn't sit on the PT committee, but it's again getting that, what are they doing into our public space? Because I don't think regional council are the best communicators.
So, that is something that should be discussed at the PT committee, or alternatively the regional council have offered to come and speak to council, so we could invite them to come to the next either a PSOC meeting or an AFTI committee meeting if you wish them to talk about the initiative. So it'd be good if you could maybe flow some questions through to me so that they can make sure they're targeting the particular issues that you'd like them to cover. They've offered and very willing to do that.
That would be very much appreciated. That's really good. Thank you.
That's a great initiative. We just need to decide which committee, I guess.
The elected members can give me some feedback on which committee, and as I say, if collectively you've got a range of questions you've covered, then we can arrange that. So maybe through the chair, happy to arrange that. Yep, that'd be great. Heidi, do you have anything to add since you're a member of the PT committee?
Just that would be a really good thing to do, is to bring them in and talk together. It's communication.
Yeah, I'm an alternate to the committee and go, but I know that they are working through further of the review of the PT, which are annual plan discussions now for them, because there's funding implications, things like the Pies Bar trial, and there are other things that were, they've done some of the route changes, but there's some other things that are still coming, but because they are funding, there's funding implications, they've kind of said we can't, got to wait till we consult. It's important to note that everything they do funding-wise comes from our ratepayers. So, there are no generous freebies from there. So we do need to keep our eye on it, and I think this meeting would be really good to have them come here.
Which are, bringing them here, Chair, and making the point very clearly that you've made, and some of us know, but I don't think our public really understand, that we fund our own buses, may in fact encourage the ratepayers of Tauranga City to submit to the regional council's planning, something they're not particularly good at the moment, but I think that's largely because they're uninformed. They don't know where the money goes.
Okay, so that'll end the transport thing. I think it's probably a good place. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hughes, do you have another question?
I've just got a Tauranga Transport Plan question around the 4 well-beings and how we're measuring success into the future. Are we looking to measure environmental outcomes, social outcomes, etc., across our design and our implementation over time?
Yes. So we'll be taking a framework similar to UFTI. We'll be taking those objectives and KPIs.
I'll come to you, Jaco. Just pause for a moment. I'm sorry, I almost forgot to ask you if you have a question. And to carry on, Alistair.
So we'll be taking a lead from UFTI, because UFTI is that sort of earlier business case work, and taking that framework and then sort of dropping it down the next level. And UFTI does look across the environment and the social, and I can't recall the other 3 objectives, I'm afraid, but the intent is yes.
Okay. One day the chair will be able to look at his screen in front of him and see a little picture of Jaco, so he can be reminded that there's someone else in the meeting. Jaco, you have questions you'd like to ask? Can you hear me?
Meantime, Chair, would you like me to email you a picture of Yako?
It's all right, I can survive, I think, but...
Hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that. I had the audio coming through the live stream and I'd muted my Skype just because that quality's a lot better. So just a question on the Waka Kotahi NZTA funding. Do we have an idea of what projects are likely to not receive funding and what may receive funding? Do we know where that line is yet, given that the funding is tight nationally?
The most recent advice we received from the agency was their formal letter back in November, December, I think it was, that identified certain projects that were likely and unlikely. Since that time, they're continuing to monitor, I guess, their cash flow, and some projects have been able to, that were, I guess, notated as unlikely, have been funded. Domain Road, I think, is one example. But we would need to go back to them and sort of ask for their most recent sort of position on likely and unlikely projects. I suspect they're probably keen to do that nationally rather than council by council. But we could bring out the letter from November and December and just sort of provide a little update on that if that helped.
Okay, no, that would be good, thank you.
The other point on that, as you see on the pages 25, we've said that we're collating a prioritised list of business cases to be developed, so we're working on that. And what we do know is that if we have a business case and NZTA completed and NZTA funding comes available, then if you're ready to go, you're more likely to receive it. So we need to think about that as we choose which business cases we actually invest in and get completed and have them sitting in the drawer so that we can pick up any opportunity that might present itself in the future.
Okay, is that all your questions, Councillor Arbery? Thank you. Before we just take a break, I'll ask Christine to give a summary response to the question Councillor Robson asked at the very beginning. For the benefit of the public who may want to hear about the meeting tomorrow at Smart Growth.
So I think I answered some of the questions before when we were talking about AFTI and the timelines and the work that's underway. So in the fact that there's further evidential works at the moment, we're waiting on work from Market Economics, which is their view on employment projections and the likelihood of those under the various scenarios. There is work underway in allocating where the business land is going to be under each of the program options. There is going to be transport modelling completed, and the other two substantive pieces of evidence, because I think that's what you're trying to understand, is what evidential work was planned and underway. NZIER have been contracted to deliver the financial case. They will be applying the Treasury Better Business Case methodology. And Becca have been engaged to develop the economic case. So they have been working with NZTA for a while and developed a tool which is called the Indicative Efficiency Ratio tool. One of the concerns that we had is that it's really hard to come up with a BCR, a benefit cost ratio, given the nature of the plans in the long term, the time frame of them, but also the lack of definition around some of them at this point. And they've been working with NZTA to create a tool that would help in those sort of circumstances. And so what we're going to do is to apply that tool, and they're going to use that to build the economic case and come up with BCR ratios. So, and that would be acceptable to NZTA in terms of the business case methodology. So that work is planned to be completed in time to deliver the final report in May.
Thank you for that response. To a certain extent, my question relates to the order of events. I like to, before I make a promise to pay something, I like to have some idea of the size of the bill. So I think there's a sequencing issue here. More to the point, I suppose, we've got the questions from Councillor Yako Arbery about how the split of the funding might be, and even in the short term, we're struggling to identify exactly where that might fall. I also understand there's still evidence being collected around, for instance, rail, yet I see the interim report concluded that a rail-centred approach was the right way to go. So what I see is a series of sequencing issues around AFTI, which give me some concern. The biggest one being us potentially signing up in good faith, and I think there are some, technically speaking, weasel words in the MOU. We will use best endeavours but even using best endeavours, conversations around the size of the bill is in the billions, and I think our community should have some idea of the size of that bill, you know, before 3 of my colleagues sign up for it tomorrow.
Thank you. That's why we will explore it a little bit more but this afternoon. But just to clarify, when you mention the billions, we're talking about the actual construction of all of these projects, not the UFTI costs. You know, let's just in case anyone misunderstood that. Okay, we'll take our break. Let's come back at 10:40, please, and we'll resume our meeting. That'll give us 15 minutes for a break, and we'll get to attachment B, the update on the waters planning projects. Thank you. We'll now move to attachment B and go through the waters planning projects. Thank you, Andy and Claudia, to take us through. We'll do the same thing we did with transport, take us through, and then we'll come back to questions. Thank you.
Yeah. So on the Eastern Corridor and Western Corridor, we will actually prepare a detailed report for the next meeting where we will take you through all the details, the staging of them and how the cost is being set up. Maybe just a short note on the Western Corridor. It has got several stages, and while we were looking at all the new growth areas, the first stage could also implement part of 3A, and so that was part of the annual plan budget which was put forward to you, but it's mainly for the new growth areas. But I can talk you through that at the next meeting in more detail as well. So there's a Te Papa spatial planning project, and for that we are also looking at water supply, wastewater and stormwater projects to make sure that we can actually facilitate that intensification project on the long run. And we have got for each of them, for all of the 3 waters, a specific project on the go at the moment. The Te Manga ocean outfall, so we are still in the space of investigating different options and try to find a solution where we can maybe potentially delay some of the big upgrade costs for a later time. Western Corridor water supply study, we just initiated this project and we're expecting to have it finalized by September, so all the information will be available for the long-term plan discussions.
Just on that one, I think, just to note that unlike wastewater, where the structure plan for Tauriko Business Estate faced some challenges in terms of implementation, and we had to move to a different strategy, move towards a different strategy in terms of water supply. That's not the case for the lakes and the Tauriko Business Estate areas. So the I guess this Western Corridor water supply study is looking more into the future for Tauriko West and Kenyon Road and beyond.
And the Eastern Corridor water supply study, this is where we have got Wari and the first pipeline projects already being implemented. And this is looking at stage 2 and 3 to take the water all the way to the mount. And so we need to do the planning for that now, especially knowing that Joyce Road supply is at capacity. And so by supplying more water to the coastal part from Wari, we will put less pressure onto the Joyce Road supply. Coming to the stormwater projects, for Tauriko West, we are working on a comprehensive stormwater discharge consent, which we intend to lodge at the same time as the structure plan is being notified. So we have got really aligned planning happening. The Kaituna overflow is a very large project. We keep on planning to ensure we have got all the planning done by the time it needs to be implemented. The Nanako stormwater consent. So this is a consent in the Kennedy Road area where we experienced issues with an existing road embankment, which was seen as a dam. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. And we are having now a plan where we will enhance the road embankment to make it a large dam. So it's actually being built properly, and have to construct a second dam further downstream, which will then allow all the development in that area to go ahead. And we have got a solution. We are working through some further design details and planning our assessment of environmental effects to have further detailed discussion with the regional council on that consent, and also preparing for landowner engagement. So by the end of March, we have sort of wrapped up our technical work to a point where we can have these discussions with our stakeholders.
So just jumping in there, just for context for new councillors, the Nanako stormwater consent is critical to opening up zoned land, already zoned land in the lakes development that's owned by Classic Builders and other landowners up on in the Kennedy Road area. And just going back previously to the Kaituna overflow, that's a large overflow structure from the Wairaki stream to the Kaituna River, which is critical to enable development of the Eastern Corridor, particularly opening up of T2 in the future. So that's in the design stage. Construction is still some way off.
Yeah, maybe as the Nanaka stream consent was a bit of an example where we've got a road embankment, which then falls into the definition of a large dam. And so this is related to the large dam safety upgrades I mentioned down the list as well, where a new dam safety regulation is put up as a draft. And I haven't heard differently, but it's supposed to be in place by mid this year, but I'm not sure if that's really coming. But there's a definition that these floating embankments, which are holding back water at certain times and have got a certain size, would fall under that definition. And we did a GIS exercise where we realized we have got 40 of these dams or potential dams. And in our asset register, there are only 3 which have been properly built as dams. So from some work we have done so far, if we actually have to bring these road embankments up to standard, each one of them could be a cost of 2 to 4 million, just a rough number I have right now. And so what we are planning would be that we put a case forward for the long-term plan to have first, over the first 3 years, an assessment of all of these structures to see what it would take to bring them up to standard, and then to have a discussion on what time frame we would be willing to take to actually spend that budget potentially and bring them up to this. So there will be some dams which have got a high risk and people might be affected by it in the, if there should be a dam failure. Some of them might be low risk and we might want to prioritize these construction costs.
Just to clarify here, this is not a case of the infrastructure not being built properly in the first place. This is a case of the standards at the time the infrastructure were built being significantly different to what the proposed new standards are, and the requirement to have to bring infrastructure up to that new standard. Much like around town with buildings in town, there's new rules around seismic shaking, and those foundations and structures need to be improved to meet those new standards.
And just coming back to the city densification Te Papa work we are doing around stormwater. So we are looking at our areas which are being flooded right now, and if there are actually opportunities to enhance the overland flow path, so we are getting less ponding areas. And this overland flow path enhancement can go hand in hand with the blue-green network, where we can also provide linear parks or connect parks and around walkways along these pathways where the water flows down to the stream or the coast. And that could provide a lot of amenity as well. And we are just starting to test this in one little sub-catchment. And I think it would be quite worthwhile to bring that to you after we have done some initial work on this. And yeah, our water supply modeling, wastewater modeling, that's all going to plan, and specifically on the wastewater modeling, where we're just creating a new strategic model that is going very well, and we are very, it looks very good that we will have got a good model up and running and can start to do all our scenario testing mentioned on the first page, and also the long-term plan scenarios. And for stormwater modeling, so we have updated all of our flood models and have the results to support the plan change 27, which is supposed to be notified. I think we're talking about August right now. So we have done our homework and we are just doing some what we call rapid flood hazard modeling. Will not be to the same level, but for the rural areas where we haven't any flood models at the moment. But that should be all available by August. And at the moment, we are just looking on how to present the information to really show overland flow paths, ponding areas, floodplains, so it becomes really clear which rules would apply.
Thank you, Claudia. So we'll go back to page 26, please. We'll work through page by page again, as we did. Eastern Corridor Wastewater Study. Western Corridor Wastewater Study. Councillor Robson.
It's just for context, but we might as well start here. When we go through the transport projects, there's frequent reference to UFTI, because the Urban Form and Transport Initiative, transport drops down into transport, easy link to make. We've just gone through a massive area of infrastructure, which is equal in size. We think about Waiari and things like that, equal in size in terms of capital investment, risk, and all the rest of it. But there's no mention of UFTI in every one of these projects. So I'm just looking for reassurance that, you know, as much time as our transport people are spending in the UFTI space, are our waters people, our Three Waters people, spending an equal amount of time in that space? Because what we don't want to do is to do our spatial planning on a map and make sure we've got the transport right, but then we find out that, oops, there's actually no water there or whatever else. So can we get that reassurance, and can we get a report on where the possible issues might be in that connection as well, because it's not here?
Yeah, I guess in terms of these projects, these are around more near-term delivery, and therefore based on the existing smart growth spatial pattern, where we have had water and wastewater strategies developed for quite some time. Now we're looking to just implement them. Obviously a lot of work has gone into the thinking around wastewater with projects like the Southern Pipeline and the upgrades of the Tamanga treatment plant, and in terms of water supply, equally around the delivery of the Waiari water treatment plant. That puts us in a really good position for delivering water infrastructure for the next 50 years for the city, and from a strategic perspective. And largely there is quite a lot of flexibility around where that growth goes in terms of how much intensification versus additional greenfield development in the west or in the Papamoa areas and those sorts of things. When you get into the really long-term thinking around urban form and through UFTI, around 100 years, you start seeing some other ideas around you know, maybe some large settlements out in the east or up in the north and into Puna or beyond. Those areas haven't been tested in terms of waters infrastructure, but would, I guess, the reality is that no matter where we grow in the long term, there's going to have to be significant waters infrastructure investment, and that would come as, you know, beyond in the 30 to 100 year period through UFTI, it's indicative. And so we're not nailing anything down, and there would be subject to specific further actions. Some of those actions at the appropriate time would be much more detailed investigations into water and wastewater servicing, which are very much on a network basis. Stormwater is more localised, so less of an issue that you need to really think about at a really high strategic level, but certainly once you start thinking about landform, then you need to really start thinking about stormwater. So I hope that answers your question, John.
Yeah, just a supplementary maybe, Andy, that you could expand on too, that, you know, as you said, this is based on our current settlement pattern, spatial plan 2013 sort of thing. But the other factor that's different is the funding model. The transport is linked into NZTA, which is linked into UFTI, whereas we can go ahead with these things. We're funding these projects basically. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Well, you know, that's absolutely correct. And I guess one of the reasons for also the delivery of UFTI was the significant gap around having transport solutions and projects agreed and in place and funded, and we don't certainly have that in the water sense.
And if I maybe can add, so where we are actually implementing new infrastructure for wastewater and water supply, we are planning that asset hopefully will be in the ground for 80, 100 years' time. So we make some assumptions where the journey might go. And so UFTI is quite good that it might give us a sense of where the journey might go. And in absence of any of these plans, as water planners, we usually make some assumptions ourselves, more or less. I know it's with the ball glazing sometimes, but you don't want to put assets into the ground and after 20 years' time you have to dig them out again or they are not sufficient. So we're quite used to future planning. And the Western Corridor is an example where we have got a staged implementation approach. So we look what are the needs now, and then how can we expand on that existing network for future growth. And the different stages, when I talk about it in the next meeting. So the second stage clearly could not happen if, for example, all the upper growth areas which have been identified to smart growth, if we don't want to go there anymore, if that changes, we are not spending all the money right now to cater for them, but the system is set up that we can expand.
I can summarize the three responses, encapsulate it and make sure I've just got it right. Your answers collectively are, don't worry, the water stuff is integrated with the future urban form stuff. We're not going to be sitting here as a pensioner in 10 years' time hearing about the fact that we've gone somewhere but we didn't provide the water for it, as we've heard actually recently. Is that the reassurance I can take from this?
Quick comment, I think Marty would like to jump in, but you're absolutely right, John. That's exactly what we're thinking, and in our thinking we're doing future proofing. I talked about future proofing around the transport network in the east before, around the Papamoa East Interchange. Claudia's just mentioned we're doing exactly the same thing for the Western Corridor. So if we ever choose to move further up into the hills in terms of growth in there, the Belk Road, Peninsula, Merrick Road, Joyce Road, those sort of areas that were identified through the Smart Growth Strategic Study, then we've got a plan around how we would service that with water and wastewater infrastructure. We know we can make it work.
Document that reassurance and reports that come to us, it just helps.
And we're trying to really bring that view, there's one of the key views we are bringing to UFD around the need to think ahead, to future-proof that over 100 years things aren't certain, so what we might think today may not be what happens in 50 or 100 years, so we need to think broader so we don't close options off.
That's not to say that financing and then funding the infrastructure is not an issue, because it is a very real issue. In fact, that's essentially what is holding us back on much of this work at the moment.
Bring this to the annual plan. Councillor Hughes.
Hi, have we got any existing work going on around the stormwater going out into the harbour and into the ocean in regard to catching plastics and things? Is there any work going on? I know that there's options for catching those from the stormwater. Are we talking about that?
So we have got we've got actually 3 consents for our discharges to the harbour and to the streams across the city. And there are certain provisions for sediment and other contaminants, but they are not including heavy metals at the moment. So there's no specific program as I'm aware of, at least not from our end. But by actually doing some of the other work, for example, by putting in rain gardens, for example, they're very often actually quite good in trapping also litter, which is very often plastic associated. So people complain that they are looking so often, they are actually capturing all the rubbish, which need to be cleaned out, but they're actually doing part of their job as well.
So are you saying that that's happening in brownfields or just greenfields? Is that actually happening, those kind of water-sensitive design solutions? Are we looking at those in brownfields currently?
Yes, so our existing consent actually requires us to look into options also for redevelopment opportunities. So there is a consent condition to look into what we call low-impact design at that time, which is basically water-sensitive design as well as we call it now. And that captures new areas, but also existing areas.
Thank you.
We just want to clarify a little further with, I think part of your question was, we have a program of ongoing replacement of our, what do you call them? The
manholes and the filters in the manholes.
So you catch plastic there.
Yeah.
Do we? So we've got filter systems. Sorry, can I?
Just going to suggest that this is a great question, but we don't sit at that level of detailed sort of operational, and it's possibly something that could be better directed to the relevant staff in the waters team through the PSOC committee, perhaps.
Thanks.
I can take
I'll note to get a reply back to you on that. I think would be the best thing, because I'm pretty sure we are rolling out a program across the city all the time on that. Pio Kawe.
Kia ora. Definitely support future proofing of our water networks, and clearly the 3 waters, and in fact all waters, are significant to tangata whenua. So I just want to make sure that the engagement from the outset, that those hapu that reside within those water catchments are actually engaged, and council will be aware that all of the waterways are under statutory acknowledgements, and they're coming through in all of the iwi settlements. So it is prudent to make those engagements, you know, like when we're talking around the future-proofing 50 to 80 years in those catchments. It's good to, you know, have those discussions with Ngāi Tamarawaho, Ngāti Hangarau, Wairua, and the like around those catchments. So I'm just raising that. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So page 27 next, Councillor Clout.
Thank you. Just on the Te Manga Ocean Outfall project and the very bottom right-hand corner, clearly there's a massive difference between the relining option of 5 to 10 million and then the replacement of the pipe at 150 to 200 million. Now, what is currently sitting in our LTP for that project at the moment? Just so we get a feel for whether it's going to be a big upside or a big downside.
Yeah, so it was estimated we need 170 million to upgrade the pipe, and that was sitting out 2028, I think, so it was kind of far away. And we are currently looking into options if we can actually push this out a bit further, as we have got a discharge consent until 2040, and which is still another 20 years, which is quite an asset to us as well. So other councils only receive wastewater discharge consent for a 20-year period. So to actually have that in place is quite important for us. And so we are looking what we can do with the existing infrastructure. And yeah, so the 5 to 10 million, we are also looking into these relining options if that's really feasible, because it's quite a long pipe. It hasn't been done before under the sea. So this is quite a new field, and we need to really be sure that it works and we are not creating any unintended consequences from it. We're also looking at wider options if we can look more wider into the network to reduce the amount of flows going to the treatment plant itself. And yeah, so we will prepare another paper for the committee to actually look, or when we come up with different options, to make a final call on where we should go at some stage.
I think we'll ask Nick to make a statement to that too, please.
Yeah, just in terms of how we go through the option or problem definition, option generation and option selection, we now have for Te Manga, the wastewater project, the whole project overall, established project advisory board similar to the one that we have on Waiari, and that's something that's come out of the capital projects review, where we review the top risks projects to the council, and this was one of the ones that stood out. Big investment, big range of options to decide between. So we're really sort of putting a lot of emphasis behind that decision making, and some of the characters that you will recognise from the Waiari project board is on this one as well.
Thank you. Just before I come to Councillor Hughes, you had another question. Just want to check in with you, Councillor Arbery. Just for a protocol going forward today, you just turn your microphone on and say, question please, at any point, and then I'll know you've got something you want to ask and we'll get to you. Can you hear me on that, Yako?
Sounds good. Thank you, Larry.
Okay, thank you. From Councillor Hughes.
Sorry, just on the city intensification area and also on new developments, are we, the models that you talk about for stormwater, etc., do they model the difference in housing design and things like wastewater from toilets and different building code mechanisms that could help inform what we're doing?
Yeah, so they are not going into that level of detail, but we have to provide boundary condition or assumptions to the models. So for example, how much water usage there is per household, and reflecting, for example, water saving devices, we could just assume a lower level and then run that through the model. What would that mean for us in the long term?
And on the basis of that then, is that informing our building codes and our plans for sustainable building models going forward for how we, I think,
Yeah, so in the water space, we're all together not just looking at the modeling, but how we could actually manage, or the water supply side, for example, we are looking different routes of how we can actually manage that better. So that's currently existing operational, how we operated the system. There's the future planning of more growth and the existing takes, if we can keep them on that level, or when do we actually need maybe potentially another water source. So we try to estimate that as well. And then there's also the demand management, where we're looking at different options, how to reduce the water demand over time as well. And that includes residential, but also looking into opportunities for industrial reuse, etc.
Thanks.
Maybe just, if I may intervene and comment, just for the purpose of new councillors and that question, that we have, a number of us have over the years raised the question of stormwater, rainwater tanks that then flush through your toilet and through your laundry and all the rest of it, and whether we should intervene in the building consent process to say you have to put them in, or you know, do you just put in an alternative system of plumbing so you can hook up later and all that, because that's what reduces some of that water wastage and absorbing some of the stormwater rain impacts. And we've never really had intensive analysis of it all, if there's a cost benefit for the homeowner doing it all. But I assume that's kind of what you're alluding to, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And for resilience too, for the house owner, on the basis of the, storing their own water and water shortages and everything. How are we kind of working on that form of resilience when we're looking at the three waters?
Yeah.
So
Christine will just respond if she can, Claudia.
I say the same thing as what Claudia's going to say. See, there was a piece of work done, which I think I've circulated to Councillor Hughes by Becca probably 18 months ago, where we looked at it from a water supply perspective about on-site storage, etc. They'd done a similar exercise for Auckland. What that basically said is you actually need to build your infrastructure for peak demand, which is over the summer season. And if you think about this year, we've had a drought, so even if you had a water tank, you would be relying on the council network to provide it to you. And the other thing to think about too was that we're moving to much higher density in terms of our dwellings, so the site space for on-tank storage, unless you're going to do it actually beneath the base of your dwelling, takes up some of the limited space that you've got on site. So it is a possibility, but in terms of reducing what you need to invest in your network, it doesn't do so. It did identify that in terms of stormwater, that stormwater retention would be an appropriate technique in some particular areas where there were stormwater issues, and that is actually already required now and will be strengthened through the stormwater plan change, where people are going to have to mitigate on-site impacts, and that may mean they need to put storage devices on their own sites. So I'm happy to circulate that again further to the rest of the elected members. I don't know if Claudia wants to add any more to that.
Yeah, maybe just in regard to stormwater, which is the key driver in Auckland for rain tanks. The situation here in Tonga is slightly different, as we're having to a large degree soakage devices. So the stormwater is actually going into the ground and back into the groundwater, which is the best way of actually managing stormwater. And so from that perspective, I really don't like to promote rain tanks too much, because we would actually get away from the best system we have at the moment, and promoting rain tanks for stormwater purposes. So where ground soakage is not an option, rain tanks would be a good alternative. So for example, in areas where we have got geotechnical issues and you don't want to put more water into the ground, not risk slippages, etc. But I think an area where we still could do more work, and maybe there's a reason for having rain tanks, is actually for resilience purposes. But the question is then, how big should that be? And you need to also make sure you're actually not just capturing some water and then it's standing there for a long, long time. It's actually not suitable for drinking, so there needs to be a replenishing on a regular basis. And the question is that best done on an individual household basis, or should we actually look at decentralized places across the city instead, where people can go and get then fresh water? I think there's a bit more research to be done, what is actually best for Tauranga.
It starts to make sense if you get to volumetric charging for wastewater, because you then save, you know, it's the homeowner gets a recovery on it really, and then we get there. So that's still a few years away. Page 20, oh sorry, we have a question from Jaco. Thank you.
Yeah, this might be a question for the LTP discussion, but I was just wondering if we have any idea on the difference of, I suppose, peak demand on our wastewater network between commercial and residential, and particularly if we're going to volumetric. I suppose a lot of household use would be for gardening, so probably a lot of their water use might go into the ground rather than the wastewater system, whereas maybe an office block more would go down the pipes. So I suppose just wondering whether we have that sort of information available or not.
Yeah, so we are having data available, so I don't want to give you a number now out of my head, but there's information available, and we could put something together.
Okay, page 28, 29, just a quick question, Claudia, about the Oropi upgrade. I didn't see that mentioned in the water supply.
Yeah, so that project is run by the operations team because it's an immediate reaction to it, so it's not a future planning.
Questions there, page 28, 29. We'll go over the page to 30, 31. Yes, go ahead.
On the Kaituna overflow, yeah, so I don't know much about that project, but in a flood event with the Kaituna River, you know, overflowing or being in flood, is there enough head to get water from those suburbs into the Kaituna?
Yeah, so that is part of the whole planning. And the Kaituna, so at the moment we have got Harrison Cut and another one where at high flows, the water is actually going into the sea. And if we develop Te Tumu or reach a certain level of flows in our existing areas, we would have to build the Kaituna overflow as another, I believe, point.
Okay. Page 31, just the Nanako stream, Nanako stormwater consent. Are we saying that until we acquire the land from the landowner, the temporary pond that's up the top on, is it on Tauranga Drive, or what is the road? But, you know, that's there to mitigate in the thing. Is that going to have to stay there for that length, or can it be decommissioned soon?
So I'm not 100% sure which one you're referring to, but I know that Classics have got one consent for a pond on the top, and yeah, that's only temporary. So, but at the time when we have upgraded Kennedy Road embankment, then that can disappear and they can discharge into it.
So it doesn't have to wait for any compulsory acquisition
No.
or anything process?
So it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, Claudia, but it looks like the implementation of the Nanako Stream stormwater system will be in two stages. So you've got the upgrade of the large dam, the Kennedy Road structure, and everything to the south of that, which would enable the land in that southern part of Kennedy Road to be developed, like the Classics land.
Yeah.
And then there's the northern part where there's a range of other landowners and different solutions that are needed in there. That's correct.
Yeah, so it's nearly everything behind Kennedy Road which can be developed there, but it's not a full development. We can only fully develop all of that land until the final solution is being implemented, but most of it can.
Ultimately, the pond on the top of the hill, which is a quaint place to build a pond,
yeah,
will be decommissioned when it's all sorted out down
yes.
below.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Question?
It's good to see the large dams being mentioned. I just wonder whether we can't get a briefing from someone around our legal liabilities around large dams. Yeah, I went to a session at the New Zealand Society of Large Dams and Australia National Commission on Large Dams, 2016, and they had a lawyer talk to us about that. And we're liable under civil law, the RMA, the Building Act, and a few other bits of legislation, which actually, as it was explained to us, potentially puts elected members and senior management at risk of going to prison should something fail. So I just wonder if, we can't have a briefing from someone on that to explain our liabilities around these large dams.
Yeah, I'm sure we can arrange something for the elected members.
That'll be noted. Thank you. Moving on to page 32, 33. Oh, wow, we've come to the end. Councillor Hughes?
I just wanted to make one comment. My daughter is currently doing the Waters education program in her school, and they are absolutely learning so much. It's amazing. They come home telling us about wipes. They come home telling us about what it means to put clean water out into the ocean, and it's a real great program in the school. So thanks for your team for that.
Great. So it's not really my team, but I will pass it on.
That concludes this update, quarterly update. We'll go back to recommendations on page 14, which is to receive the report. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Andrew, for that. Moved Councillor Robson, seconded Councillor Hollis. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Assuming no one wants to speak to us.
The Mayor, I believe.
Now, next item is the natural hazards, 8.2. And I think we have Campbell Larkin coming to address this, supported with, or no, overseen by. Thank you, Brad. In your hands. I have asked that we do get a bit more substance here because it's important for the public to hear this. We won't go through the full 1 hour slides, but Campbell is going to give us a bit more of a background to it, just so we can bring everyone up to speed.
Good morning, everyone. So as you know, we have a long-term natural hazards program for the city. It started some plus 20 years ago with the mapping of coastal erosion and flood hazard inundation. As we have progressed through the years, we have continued to review that information, and we also tackle the other challenges of natural hazards that the city faces. Specifically, we've had, since around 2013, the building of a range of flood hazard catchment models, Tsunami Survive, and also the planning for all our greenfield work, which takes into account a range of sea level rise scenarios and a range of natural hazards. As we build this information, we utilise it in our planning work, in our building consent work, and we share this information with the public, specifically to affected landowners. Okay. The reason why we do this work is to manage our legislative functions. We have functions across the Local Government Act, the Building Act, the Resource Management Act, and the Civil Defence Emergency Management Act. And the information that we are providing largely is building upon older, outdated information. So as an example, in terms of liquefaction, it is an update following our prior 2003 work and following significant events that we've faced in New Zealand, such as the Canterbury earthquakes. We also have a significant monitoring program that has occurred around our city, specifically in regard to coastal erosion over the last 20 years, where we can update and input that new information into the work we do. Going forward and heading towards the long-term plan, we also have the Resilience Project. And the Resilience Project is a significant project for the organisation because the outcomes of that work are around trying to manage our urban form and the infrastructure associated with that urban form to improve the resilience of the city to both shock events and what we might also call slow creep natural hazard events, those that are affected by sea level rise. And when we're talking about the concept of sea level rise, we're talking about that over a 100-year period and considering a range of sea level rise scenarios and the adaptation to that. Last year we released updated information on harbour inundation. That takes into account a minimum of 3 natural hazard inundation events, a 50-year, a 100-year and a 500-year. And that is the overtopping of sea over the land through those events, and also a range of different sea level rise scenarios. 5,500 odd letters were sent out to affected parties, and we hold a range of one-on-one meetings with those affected landowners. That information was then used and is continued to be used in our planning processes. Pre that, in August, back in April, we also sent around 800 letters out to inner harbour landowners that were identified as potentially being affected by erosion over the next 100 years, taking into account, once again, the land instability issues around our harbour peninsulas and our low-lying land, and the effects of sea level rise. This year we have quite a significant program that carries on. The specifics of that are focusing on open coast erosion, liquefaction and lateral spread, and later this year on slope instability updates. All of this information comes together and fits within the resilience project that then allows us to understand the exposure of natural hazards on our urban form, but also our infrastructure, and then aid in the thinking around how we improve that resilience. So this week is a significant week for our team. We have released letters to our affected community along the open coast for new updated erosion information. So to be clear, we have had erosion information along our open coast for over 20 years now. It is called the CHEPA, and it maps current erosion risk, 50-year and 100-year. It is not a probabilistic analysis, or previously was not. It was around likelihoods and taking into account sea level rise over a 50 and 100-year period. We have now, having 20 years of erosion monitoring information, been able to put that information into a new model, look at the different effects of sea level rise and also the probabilities of different erosion scenarios occurring. So when we send this information out, which has gone out in the mail, and this is the record of that going out, a letter directly to the landowner is sent and includes a map of the changed information and an FAQ. Those landowners then have the ability to book in for a one-on-one session with staff. They're held at Mount Surf Club and Papamoa Library, where we can then take those landowners through that information so they can actually understand it. This is a process that we've run for a number of years now in terms of the dissemination of that information, and are allowing for the one-on-one transaction between staff and that affected landowner so they understand what that information means. That is because it impacts upon the consenting process, but also that information sits on the land information memorandum. Approximately 660 properties are affected, but that translates to around 542 litres going out, because once we take out the TCC reserve land and the TCC owned land, and also where we have people who own more than one property. Okay, so there's about 542 ratepayers affected by this information. The other piece of work that we've landed on is the delivery of new updated liquefaction and lateral spread information. So liquefaction is a term that we learnt, or a lot of New Zealand learnt following the Canterbury earthquakes. That is where the land largely turns to liquid, and anything that is built above it or within it is vulnerable to exposure of that earthquake shaking hazard, and has largely not been built on the basis that that land turns liquid. So the foundations can collapse, pipes can break, etc. Steve has led a project around the mapping of that at a city-wide scale. It has taken around 3,000 CPT that we have taken from a range of different projects, NZTA, TCC and individual developers. And we've worked with Tonkin & Taylor and Oricon to map our liquefaction vulnerability. When I mean vulnerability is essentially where it's not likely or low versus too highly likely. And then we have translated that into a range of land damage scenarios based upon a change in sea level rise. In this case, we've only looked at one future scenario of sea level rise being 1.25 metres, which is our likely expected 2130 scenario for sea level rise. With this information, because it affects every single property to some degree across the city, we are not releasing that information in letters. We are going to be doing it through an external communications process, and then also meeting and talking through with a range of practitioners. One of the key things with the liquefaction information is it is a better news story than where we have come from in our last information back in 2003. In fact, we're actually improving that data set so significantly that it benefits most properties to some degree across the city. Okay. So where we are heading over this next month is essentially all of these information will be landed in media forms or in letter from tomorrow onwards. Staff, being myself, Steve Rayner and also a couple other staff will be available to take and respond to all emails, all phone calls in regard to this information. Book these people in who need to have that conversation, whether it's at their home or at one of our open days, and we will work them through this information. We carry that service on pretty much forever and a day, as we have for all of our last natural hazard information releases. Comfortable with that introduction, sir?
Yes, Campbell, thank you for that. Any questions from elected members? And Te Pio Kawe? All right. Happy to receive a motion to receive the report. Thank you, Councillor Kitty, seconded by Councillor Salisbury. You wish to speak to it? Thank you. I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, that is carried. Just have a word from the Chief Executive.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, one of the questions that I think we need to consider is, by developing these hazard plans, there's essentially an impact on our community and their ability to be able to plan and develop in a way that they have previously. And so we are setting up another piece of work essentially to consider and address that, and to be able to liaise and communicate with particularly the development community about the impacts that this type of work creates. It's something that we'll brief councillors on separately.
Thank you. So we now have an order change in the business. We're going to 8.4, the shared e-scooter trial. I'm assuming Lauren is here. Yes, I see her in the back. So we'll have Andy come forward, I think, and all those involved with this. Lauren is here to just sit at the back there, Lauren, for somewhere, or yeah, just sit at the back. And if we do have questions a bit directed to Lime Scooter, she's here. You've all met her before in an oral presentation, a public forum presentation. We now have the final report in front of us with recommendations. So, Andy, take us through. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over the last month and a half, staff have been conducting an investigation into potentially allowing an e-scooter operator to trial e-scooters here in Tauranga. We've really focused our investigation on looking at how these experiences have been done at other councils, so Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and Queenstown, which are actually in the process of starting a trial just like we are, and working with Lime and other operators to understand what are the net positive benefits and some of the negative benefits as well, or negative impacts. In general, I think there's been a lot of media attention to e-scooter usage, both privately owned and shared. And what this report is intended to do is to really clarify some of those issues and to understand what is the role of the local authority in e-scooters and in particularly a shared e-scooter program. And there's a big distinction there, which is private e-scooter usage, or all e-scooter usage, is really governed by NZTA and the Ministry of Transport. They established the laws, and if you've seen recently, there was a new proposal called the Accessible Streets Package that Ministry of Transport and NZTA has released that clarifies some of the laws that where e-scooters can and can't go. To summarize, the way that our council will have the ability to regulate shared e-scooters are the use of the scooters are governed by NZTA, but because shared e-scooter operators are a business, we can impose a license and some conditions on that license for the operator to follow. That's how we impose these conditions that are in the report. Other than that, a private e-scooter user does not have to follow the recommendations that are in these, or in the conditions of our trial. We don't have the authority to impose those conditions on them. They must follow the laws and regulations proposed by NZTA and by the Ministry of Transport. What we've learned from other cities are there seems to be about 4 or 5 conditions that we've called them that really seem to make scooter usage or shared e-scooter usage a more positive effect for the community. This improves safety of the users, safety of non-users, so those are pedestrians or people just generally affected by scooters, and nuisance concerns, which seem to be the largest complaint related to e-scooter usage. Not really the safety aspect, but it's really people are feeling concerned about these scooters either parked inappropriately on footpaths or just being in our communities in general. What the recommendations do is we've taken the learnings from other councils, and as they've gone through their year-long process and imposed these at the end of their trials, we've decided to start our trial with these in place. That's probably the big difference that we've done. We've looked at the last 18 months of trials across New Zealand, small cities, big cities, multiple operators, and these seem to be the general consensus that all the cities are seeming to impose. In the report, you'll see that there are really 3 or 4 main ones that we're looking at. The first we're calling them courtesy speed zones. This is where we will ask the operator to impose a restricted speed limit of scooter usage in a geofenced area. In the report, we mentioned places like the CBD, places that have very high pedestrian conflict. We would impose these zones. The current speed limit being recommended is 15 kilometers. That's the same speed limit that NZTA has just released as part of their Accessible Streets package of a safe speed on a footpath. The second the second condition we are looking to do is setting a condition of operating hours. So in some places in New Zealand, there actually isn't a restricted hours. Other councils have put one in place. We've chosen to go with a 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. recommendation. We think that fits a proper time slot that allows to really capture full demand of e-scooter usage and seeing if these devices can really be a transport choice for people, particularly when our PT network maybe doesn't provide the best services at certain times of night. We've also imposed a curfew zone in some of our entertainment areas of the Mount and CBD on Fridays and Saturdays, where we would like these scooters to be taken off the streets and turned off at 9 p.m. Probably the biggest complaint and the biggest risk we have from a safety standpoint is scootering while intoxicated. I think it applies to any transport choice. And we are putting conditions in place that we hope can limit some of that risk. We know that that's not going to remove all risk, but we think, and other councils have shown, that there is a net positive effect by trying to restrict these hours. We've also spoken with the Main Street communities, the Main Street Mount and Main Street CBD, and they're also supportive of these conditions, knowing that they understand what their business operate and kind of how people interact at certain times of night. The other condition that we think is really important are parking designated zones. In the report, we don't mention exactly where these are, because ultimately one of the things we want to do is understand where demand is happening, where people are ending their trips, and then putting these in place. What this does is it really prevents a nuisance issue of where scooters are parked. We want to identify spots either in public spaces or potentially even some car parking areas where we can modify them and turn them into areas where users can then go and park their scooters. We think if we provide these zones, we will reduce the risk of these scooters falling over on footpaths or being parked inappropriately. I think one thing that we've seen is when you provide these zones, people use them. People by general nature don't want to create these hazards. We know things happen. So by providing these zones, we can reduce that nuisance issue. I don't have a number on how many we think we need yet. What we're going to do is, if this scooter trial moves forward, we'll work with Lime, understand the city, and work with our public spaces team to really understand where should we put these areas. They can be as small as 1 to 2 scooters wide in some areas, or maybe in certain key areas by maybe Willow Street where the buses are, maybe 5, 6, 7 scooters wide. So we'll really work to understand where we can put these to limit those areas. The final one that is also pretty important is a no parking zone, or no end of trip zone, we're calling it. What this allows is scooter users to be able to ride through a zone, but not end their trip there. They must take their scooter to a different zone outside of it. A perfect example is along our waterfront. We may want users to be able to ride and enjoy the waterfront, enjoy the views, but we don't think parking there makes sense because of all the pedestrian usage and potential risk of vandalism. So what we would do is there would be a zone maybe 50 meters away that says, if you're trying to end your trip, actually please move it 50 meters away from our waterfront, and you can end your trip there. The incentive for the user is they continue to be charged until the trip is properly ended on the app. And so by that behavior, we're hoping to limit some of the potential vandalism issues that you've seen or heard of scooters ending up in waterways or scooters being destroyed. We think we can create these zones in place so that we limit that risk. I think the final thing in the report that that is here is we want to stress that this is a trial, and the recommendation is to go forward with a trial. We know that we're not going to get everything perfect from the beginning. That's one of the reasons why we do a trial. We're putting these conditions in place to really understand how scooters are going to operate in Tauranga. We've got commitments from the operator. We've had commitments from the community that we've engaged with so far that we'll work together to understand how do we improve this over time, and what is the best way forward as we continue to learn how these scooters operate. The last aspect of the report I do want to mention is the operator itself. So we were approached by Lime as a council back in 2018, actually, at the end of 2018 when scooters were just forming or just starting up in Auckland and Christchurch. And at the time, our council position was not to proceed. We wanted to let other councils kind of learn and then let us take those learnings and implement them here. We've been working with Lime. I've been working with Lime for the last month and a half. I think Lime has engaged the council and the community multiple times. And we've chosen to recommend them as the operator for the first 6 months of the trial. The reason why we've chosen them is, one, they've actually have the most experience when it comes to trials in New Zealand, good and bad. They have the best experience and the best learnings from it. Two, our trial is really trying to understand what is the demand and the impact of e-scooters in our city. We really feel that working with one operator helps us do that and manage the cost of council or the hours required and potential costs from a staff standpoint. One of the key learnings from other councils has been running a trial takes a lot of time. Setting it up, dealing with media requests, dealing with customer complaints and issues takes a lot of time. And when you have multiple operators, that just amplifies. And so our trial is very focused on what's going to happen to Tauranga if we do e-scooters, how does our community view e-scooters, and how do we look to improve, if we choose to move this forward, e-scooter usage in Tauranga. And we think Lime is a perfect partner for that.
Excellent, thank you. Andy, I think the report's very, very good. Questions from members? Councillor Salisbury.
Yeah, I just have a question in paragraph 16B2. It says use is allowed on the footpath and the road, but not in designated cycle lanes. Why is that?
So that is part of the NZTA current legislation, which prescribes that only cycles are allowed in cycle lanes. Part of the Accessible Streets package that was just released and what is out for consultation now specifies that they've reclassified devices, and e-scooters qualified as a wheeled recreational device, which would be allowed in cycle lanes. So this law is now being proposed to change as part of the Accessible Streets consultation package, which would then have to go through the cabinet approval process. What we know is, if you've been on the streets right now, is people are using cycle lanes today with scooters. I don't know if, and we see it, and what we would say is, really scooter users should be in the safest place they feel possible, which in a lot of cases is a cycle lane. So we think the new laws from NZTA are going to, if they get approved, will really clarify that. We don't have any intention of enforcing that as part of this trial, because ultimately enforcement is done as a police matter. But ultimately, we think in the future they will be allowed to be in cycle lanes legally.
Just a further comment from Nick, and then further questions. Councillor Kitty.
Oh, sorry, the clarification I had was around the accessible street package, that it is just out for consultation. In the introduction, we talked about it as if it were in place already, but
yes.
It's a proposal only. And the second point that I wanted to make for clarification is that we're not buying a service, but we're selling a license to operate. And I hope that's helpful to keep in mind as we consider this. There's obviously quite a difference between the two in terms of the procurement process and how we deal with it, and is it actually that different from selling a license to operate a food truck, or a great difference between how we deal with the regional council in operating the bus service, for instance, where we provide the infrastructure, but the regional council provide the bus service. So there are, I mean, not identical, but there are similarities, I think, in how we go about thinking about it. Thank you.
Great. So we've got Councillor Kitty, Councillor Hughes, then Councillor Granger.
First of all, thanks for the report. It was really detailed and lovely to listen to. Just regarding financial and resource considerations, paragraph 21, the cost of an e-scooter trial will likely exceed the potential revenue received from the operator via licensing fees. This is based on information received from councils who have undertaken an e-scooter trial. So am I to assume that Lime scooters will be potentially will be costing them, but it won't be costing us for this trial? Is that how I'm reading it correctly?
Yes, and I think what we didn't specify in the report is a actual cash cost versus a workload cost. In most councils, and as you see from a title standpoint, the program manager for the cycle plan implementation, but we're dealing with e-scooters here. This new mode is one of these modes that a lot of councils weren't really staffed to prepare for as they launched their trial. There's also a lot of work that goes into launching a trial itself. A lot of the research investigations, dealing with legal opinions and things like that, of that nature. And so for the trial itself, we don't envision that the fees that we may collect from Lime will recoup all the staff time. It doesn't mean that the ratepayer has actually paid for more services or paid for extra things. Where that can get tricky is depending on what kind of infrastructure we put in place as part of the trial. So if we do designated parking zones and we do more than paint, and we end up doing some corrals or certain things, there may be some costs that maybe benefit more than just the e-scooter trial user, but are associated with the e-scooter trial costs. One of the things that we also recommended there was, when you look at it from a pure time basis of 6 months as a trial is, there's a real likelihood that the upfront fixed cost of running a trial, all the investigation, all that work, is not going to recoup in 6 months' time. If this were an ongoing activity, we expect two things to happen, and this has happened across other councils, is as it becomes more common, you start getting less complaints, and you start not having to deal as much with the community about e-scooters. Are they good or bad? They become much more of a regulated activity. So your workload costs will come down. The second part is, as you continue to have scooters, they keep providing fees to you over a 6 or 12-month period, but your costs don't increase anymore because your trial is over, and you've done a lot of the legal work and a lot of the investigation work into that. So from a pure business case standpoint, in a 6-month trial, I would say we will not recoup the benefit probably from the work that's gone into the trial itself. But if this continues as an activity over time, we expect that the cost would be greater than what was put into the trial itself.
And just supplementary to that, do we have the analysis from other councils that have been through with the trial, and then after that, sort of a year or two after that?
Yeah, and this is kind of one of the areas that we will continue to focus on as a staff, is really how involved council wants to regulate, and how much we want to be involved with this activity is really dependent on the council itself. So some councils have remained really involved and they want to regulate. Auckland has 4 operators, and they're monitoring and regulating them very differently than some councils which have 1 operator. And so really, I think from a staff position, our trial initially is to understand what is the demand, what is the benefit, what does the staff time look like. We will then report back to this committee and to the council to say, if this continues ongoing, there's probably either a financial ask of a workload FTE basis or not, because ultimately it depends on how we want to regulate and how ongoing that regulation will be.
I'll just insert a supplementary in there before I come to Councillor Hughes, just possibly Nick might answer too. Just the per ride fees, which is the first in New Zealand. Can you expand on that? And then could Nick perhaps explain what staff are involved in this, both obviously cycleways, transportation, but what others will be?
Sure. With the fees, what's I think different about where we are today versus where the councils were back in 2018 and the last year is we've had a lot of experience from other councils about how they've charged their fees. in almost every case, what councils have done as part of the licensing agreement, they've charged an operator up front a number, and that number is different at each council, on allowing them to use 400, 600 scooters in their city. So what we've done differently is we've started to look at what is the real impact to our cities and how do we build an environment that we think is net positive for the city and for us as a council, but also provides the right environment for a business to come in and actually operate and be successful. And so what we've done is looked at a per ride fee, which is the first in New Zealand, and we've now gotten our legal opinion on that, and it's proven to be there's no issues with instituting a fee of that nature. What it would do is we've really looked at this case for two different reasons. We think we as a council should be providing a license to operate that does two things. One, it maximizes the number of safe trips possible with the fewest amount of scooters to be used, because scooters parked actually are the main nuisance issue. And so what we want to do is provide the operator an ability to plus up and down their scooters based on demand and based on what's going on. If we charge them an upfront fee for 500 scooters, they will feel obligated or feel like they should put all 500 scooters out there. We don't think that's the right approach. We think the operator has a lot of good knowledge to come in and say, we think this community takes 350 scooters during the summer months and 120 scooters during the winter month. If that's the case, then we would have a kind of more variable, we'll call it a weekly charge on parking, and we want to be able to recoup kind of the impact of scooter usage on our streets. So if scooters are riding 3 to 4 times a day and they're using our footpaths, we want to be able to really judge that type of demand and get a fee from that as well. In the future, that fee could be used to upgrading footpaths or upgrading cycle lanes like other cities have done. But we think it's a better mechanism for both the operator and for council to really both get a better outcome from a fee structure. So that's generally how that structure works.
Thank you. Nick, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, the questioning is really helpful. I just see this as the opportunity to tune the, I guess, the FTE requirement ultimately that we will need out of council, because now is the opportunity to set or make it clear what is the obligation on the operator and what is our role. So the better we can establish that and communicate it, the better we can get role clarity around it. But of course, there is a bit of a trial component to how much effort we will have to put into it. And then I just wanted to mention as well to your question about who will run this. We do talk in the report about a steering committee between infrastructure, the transport that is, the regulatory and compliance, and the people in engagement. So there's a big involvement across all those three. What we do think that we need is the one person to own it and have the accountability ultimately for the trial inside of council. We haven't quite agreed on that yet, but we will get to that point.
Okay, so further questions? Councillor Hughes, then we have Councillor Granger. No, I've got B in there somewhere. And then Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I think possibly one of the other opportunities out of this is flexible work for people that actually in the next few weeks might be losing jobs. How many people might be employed by this trial? Do you know?
I'll speak on behalf of Lime here as the operator. So I think there's a couple of things that we know as part of their proposal that they've submitted. Is one, there would be a local operations manager hired full time. And what's interesting about the Lime business model is a combination of Lime staff and what they call juicers, the people who go juice around. Our understanding is it's about somewhere between 20 and 50 people. And what happens is juicers are almost the purest capitalistic form of work, where the more you perform, the more you're willing to work, the more you get paid. So what they find and what other people have found is that you start with 50 and some people find it too challenging, or some people do really excel at it. So probably it's more around 10 to 20 people will be kind of the highest impact, 80% of the work. And then there's the other 10 to 20% that kind of do the odd juice here and there. What I think we're at, and Lime will have their own numbers, but based on other cities, so Auckland right now has about 100,000 shared e-scooter trips a month. I think we can expect somewhere, if it were to hold out and not in a current pandemic time period, somewhere around 8 to 10,000 a month as well. What's unique about us is we'll have this summer spike and we'll see what that looks like. And I think we have those two things that as part of the trial, we'll start to understand what is our seasonal impact. Auckland doesn't necessarily have a huge seasonal change. I think because a lot of them are just, they just have a different city than we do. So we may see a lot more in the summer versus the winter months.
Thank you.
Okay, Nick, another comment?
Andy, you shared some information out of the States with me yesterday, with just in line with COVID-19 as well, and the uptake on scooter utilisation, whether it's because people don't want to get in the subway or on buses. So, there's another flow-on effect of that. Maybe you can share some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, things are changing day by day, and in certain U.S. cities, and I will have Lauren talk about her experience with Lime specifically, but they're really seeing in New York, they've seen a 65-70% increase in their bike share program, similar to a shared scooter program. And in Chicago, they've seen a 100% increase, and they're seeing their subways decrease and bus usage decrease as well during this time. So I think what it's proven in these cities is e-scooters, especially shared e-scooters, are providing an alternative transport choice. And for a lot of these cities where people don't own cars, there really is no other option, and they don't feel safe getting on a crowded bus or a crowded train right now. They're seeing that across the board. We're also seeing, and this is also really important to understand as part of our working with a large-scale operator, is in certain cities, they're now putting in bans in place. And Lauren just mentioned it in Paris and San Francisco. They're putting full quarantines in place, so you can't be out. And so Lime in 12 hours or 24 hours are going to remove every scooter in Paris and every scooter in San Francisco. And that's one of the crazy things that are happening, but it also shows when you have an operator of that size and scale, they can do amazing things in a matter of time when asked. And if we ever needed to ask that to happen, we feel very comfortable Lime would be able to perform that service here too.
Okay, Councillor Granger, Councillor Morris next.
Thank you for that. We've had a few issues with some of those cities that have tried these scooters, and speed was one, which was a concern for me. But I see that you've got here what we call a courtesy speed zone that you can apply the scooter. Just give us a bit more clarity in regards when you say here, when entering a courtesy speed zone, the e-scooter will slow down, and then when you exit it, you can speed it up if you wish to do so. Give us a bit more clarity on that.
Yeah, so from an operational standpoint, the way it works is Lime scooters are roughly, and it depends on the size of the person, and can go about 25 kilometers an hour. And what the geofence zone would do is as you enter that geofence zone, that power output decreases. Not rapidly, so you're stopped and jumping off, but it will slowly decrease and cap the speed at 15 kilometers. And so while you're in that geofence zone, if you throw the full throttle, it will limit you to 15 kilometers. As you exit that zone, the device allows you to then, your throttle to give more power essentially. So
that's what I was searching for here then. Therefore, we could we have a little bit more flexibility? So, for instance, where there might be an particular area that we might want to reduce it down to 10k or even 5. So we can govern what we want to do in particular areas.
Yes, we can govern that speed, and Lime is willing to work with us on that speed. One of the things that we have learned is that speed is a kind of a blanket across. So if you put a courtesy zone in one area, let's say Greerton at 10 kilometers, that 10 kilometer has to apply to the CBD and the Mount as well. So it's more of a blanket city zone. We had thought we might be able to do 5 kilometers here, 10 kilometers here, but that's not necessarily the case. I think the other really important aspect of it is right now the current technology exists where it's GPS based. And so we know that GPSs are only so accurate. And so if we're trying to get, footpath versus street or something, that really isn't it doesn't seem really possible for that to happen. There's probably more risk in it than actually making it happen. What's interesting is this technology evolves so quickly where there's actually a report out now that Lime is developing a scooter or a firmware update that would allow a lot more accuracy in that zone in the future if we choose to go down that and maybe looking at footpath versus streets.
On board, they will exchange those, will they?
I think it's up to the operator. So from a standpoint of the licensee, we would license them and recommend that they continue to improve their technology and safety. Ultimately, it's an operator decision about where they do these first. I think what's really important is they'll properly test them and put them in cities, and then they'll likely come to Taronga a little bit later.
Okay, Councillor Morris. Then the final question from Councillor Hughes, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, a comment phrased as an eloquent question. There are two issues as I see them. One is in Auckland there are scooters which were parked in all manner of different places once a ride had concluded. They were set up in the morning, obviously, nicely stacked, etc. In Tel Aviv, I noticed that there were scooter drop-off stations on every corner, so they were clearly demarcated area where you could park scooters on every corner rather than in front of all the other street front shops. And then the other thing was our pavement here in Tauranga, particularly in the CBD here, when it's wet, is incredibly slippery for electronic scooters. I have some experience with traction and those sorts of things. So those are a couple of issues which I'd like you to be aware of during the trial. What's your thoughts on that?
Eloquent.
Absolutely. Part of imposing that first slow speed zone in our CBD is to recognize that we have cobblestones, which aren't usually ideal, and we have really slick pavers on our footpaths. One of the natures of the trial is we and the operator will be monitoring this, and that's really important for us. The 15K zone in the CBD right now, let's evaluate if that's the right speed, if it works, and if safety concern. I think more importantly, what we try to do is achieve an outcome, and we put these conditions in place to achieve that outcome of safety in the CBD. What we may find is 10 may not be safer. It might not improve anything. It might be harder because you just have balancing issues. Maybe 15 is the right speed. We've worked with the operator to really understand what they're seeing, because they're going to see a lot of the frontline issues more than we will. And they also have a lot of experience working on all surfaces to really understand what is the best approach moving forward. So we do recognize the CBD zones. We know that's a big risk that we're trying to mitigate against. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to improve our cobblestones, and since you scooter, we're not going to be able to improve the footpaths. We'll work with Lime and see if there's an opportunity when it rains. Is there a way we can limit speeds or something differently? So I think that's where the conversation with us and Lime will continue to happen. What we also want to happen is, from a licensee standpoint or from a regulator, we'd like Lime to start engaging with the community directly. We want to start really taking our role aside. We think they're qualified to license or to be an operator, but they should be fronting a lot of these decisions, working with the disabled community, working with Main Street businesses to really gauge that impact. And we will come in and verify and say, yep, we think what you're doing is right.
I'll jump in here with a question, since I said yours was going to be the last one, Councillor. You say yours will be the last, but I think I'll ask Lauren if she'd come up for this to answer, because I think that's, Andy's just segued into it very well. We are giving you a licence. This is not our program. We don't want everyone ringing the council number, although inevitably some of them will. Can you tell us what you're going to do to front the responses from the community? What are you going to put in place? How is that all going to work out?
So we have dedicated customer support lines, 24 hours a day. We've got a dedicated email customer service line as well. We also provide my email and my phone number, our local operations team phone number, to all councillors, so that if any constituents were to contact you directly, you just pass it straight on. We do have the experience of doing this in other cities. We are the market leader in New Zealand and around the world. We have seen lots of interesting behaviour from riders and things. We get lots of people contacting us all the time, and we deal with it. We do it every day all around New Zealand as well. We go and pick up scooters from places that they shouldn't be. We pick them up from our foot patrols that are on the streets, and we're always just a phone call away. And I think that's really important as well, that we're global company, but we're very much New Zealand based. We have 100 people working for us here. We are locals, and we're around, and we will be just a phone call away.
Thank you for that. So we'll come to the final question. Councillor Hughes.
My question's just around scooter share and bike share. Have you found in other examples that one supports the other, or that how they work, or one is, if you have scooters, then you most likely don't have bike share, or are we looking at bike share?
Yeah, early on in our investigation, we actually explored this. We explored what if we wanted to do both scooters or bikes, or what if we did one versus the other. What we found is currently in New Zealand, there are 2 cities that are about to launch. Auckland has e-bikes right now as part of with Jump, and Wellington may license them in the future. I think they operate a little differently, and the real reason is in Jump or shared e-bikes require a little more parking issues, so they're larger, and they typically need to be locked into some sort of pole or something, and so they create a different type of nuisance sometimes than an e-scooter would. What we've seen in other cities, there are other cities do have both scooters and e-bikes, and I think what this trial will do is it will start to lay the framework of, if we want to explore shared services in the city of this nature of micromobility, we have the framework and conditions in place. Scooters operate differently than bikes, and so there's a different set of conditions related to where they're parked, where their zones are, things of that nature. We'll see moving forward if e-bikes, one, can work here. I think by launching scooters and getting people to understand that they have choice, I would naturally see the progression is there's a really good opportunity for us to have shared e-bikes as well. But it would have to be a little different. We would want to make sure those conditions are in place, because there's potentially a lot larger risk of nuisance issues because the devices are so much bigger. And so we might want to do, as Councillor Morris talked about, more of these parking zones, designated zones in more places that fit bikes and not scooters. Because a perfect example is about comfortably 15 to 20 scooters can fit in a parking spot, while bikes aren't of that size. So if you're trying to provide that infrastructure for these bikes to be parked somewhere, you need to do a lot more of infrastructure improvements.
Okay, so we come to page 90. Members, I will move A, B and C. And a seconder, Councillor Clout, okay. And speaking to it, look, I'm astounded actually at the quality of the report. I think probably one condition we should have put in there, that you can't pinch Andy from us. He seems to have gained an enormous amount of knowledge over the Lime Scooter business, but I think the way in which we are learning from all the other trials and implementing some things up front is excellent, and everything I've heard this morning further gives me some satisfaction that we're going to do the best we can through this. It's not, we will have troubles, we will have some people saying, you know, why are these things on the street, but mobility is an important thing for our community, and this is another opportunity to see mode share, mode shift, and I think it's well worth the trial. So I'm quite happy to support the recommendations from the teams. Appreciate Nick and Andy and the work that's gone into it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, look, I appreciate the work that's gone into it. I like the way that you've sort of learned from previous council's experiences. You've also nuanced the, the speeds, the restricted areas. I think the way you've done it is very good. I was concerned when we first started talking that it was only going to be it's quite a small geographical area, which I felt didn't really achieve the objectives. So you pretty much covered the whole city, which I think is fantastic. Clearly, micro transport, or whatever they call it, micro mobility is a way of the future. And this is something that we really should benefit from as a city. And I want to congratulate Lauren and the Lime team for being so proactive. We know there are other competitors out there, but you've really come up, stepped up to the plate and been very proactive. So, you can get some sort of reward for that, but certainly looking forward to seeing the results of the trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robson.
Yeah, it is a good report. But then I expect nothing less from Andy anyway. However, I do note that under paragraphs 21 and 22, the financial and resource considerations in the question asked by Councillor Kitty, we're light on understanding what the costs are, and therefore to talk of cost recovery is a somewhat, how can I put it, nebulous sort of path to go down at the moment, because the reality is we don't seem to have the ability in this organisation to effectively allocate costs in a way that enables sophisticated cost recovery. So while the report is good and I support the recommendations, the report yet again reminds me that we need to improve our ability to understand where costs sit and where overheads are, and to allocate costs to projects effectively so we can undertake cost recovery, because the observation that there's a cash cost and there's a sort of resource allocation cost sort of flies in the face of basic economics. There is an opportunity cost, and while our staff are working on this, they're not working on shared bicycle things or cycleways, or even better still, four-laning Hairini, whatever it might be. So I just make the point that good report, but there is that gap in it. It's not Andy's problem to solve, but at some point we really need to get into this space.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes next.
Yeah, I also commend the report and really endorse it. I think that having a trial like this and moving in to the area of micro-mobility sets a scene for people to get used to change in a slow, moderated way, in a way that in which they can be part of the transition, because it's coming, and it's really good for our community to come along on that journey with us. So thanks, team. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, I won't exercise the right of reply, so I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? And thank you, Yoko. Sorry, did you want to speak to it, Yoko? No. Okay, that's fine. But that is an aye, so that's unanimous, I think. All those, anyone against? Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. That motion is passed. We will now break for lunch, and we'll come back at 1, and we will come back into public excluded to look at that report, the public excluded